first got ruled active for game one, like before the line moved, I was like, oh, this is just crazy amount of value. I think the line was available for as low as like minus 196. And then they ended up getting to like minus 250 by the time game one started. I was like, oh, great value. I'm so happy with that, and felt really good about it until basically the second half of yesterday.
Yeah, dude, beating closing line value is always great until it goes the complete opposite direction. But you got to do it. You don't really have a choice. Anyway, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NBA Deeper Dive presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Get them YSRPs. We'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, I'm Dave Loughran. On the Twitters at Lafay_D. Hit me up. And while you're there, this has been a long time. Haven't done a show with this guy since the bubble finals back last season. Greg Ehrenberg at G Ehrenberg DFS, breaking down a two-gamer with me today. What's going on, man?
Yeah, it's cool because I mean, people always assume on these shows like, oh, there's some kind of rivalry. Be like, oh, Josh hates Lofty, which actually, I mean, maybe that's true. But that aside, like everybody's like, oh, these guys have rivalries. These guys don't like each other. But I mean, like, I consider you definitely a friend of some sort. You know, we don't have that many interactions with each other, but I definitely like you. But we just weren't on the schedule all together this year for basketball, and we were a couple times a week last year. So I was actually looking forward to this when I saw it on the schedule.
Yeah, no question. So was I. I'm always looking like, all right, Adam's out. Who do I got? And I was like, oh, sweet. All right, I got Greg today. That's good. And yeah, that misconception of the rivalry with Josh and myself is hilarious because we do 5 shows a week together for the past like 3.5 years, you know? So it is what it is. Hey, it makes for good interaction. I guess that's all that matters. But yeah, we got a lot to talk about today. Only 2 games, but a ton to dive into. The Philadelphia 76ers on the brink of elimination. And then Kawhi Leonard lists LA Clippers looking to take. This is amazing if they win 4 straight after being down 0-2 and then down 0-2 against the Dallas Mavs and beating them in 7. Before we jump into this and say hi to everyone, Greg, I want your opinion because we haven't really touched on any of this stuff. I talk to Adam about it all the time and Josh and Ben, but you and I haven't dived into this. With Philly, could there have been a better opportunity to sneak into the finals this year with Irving going down and then Harden being hobbled and Kawhi Leonard being out and Chris Paul's status being up in the air? They might blow this.
Yeah, they very well might, and certainly something I'm nervous about because the mics were out when we first started. But I mean, when Embiid was first ruled active for game one, and I tweeted about it, I was like, there's crazy amount of value on the Sixers because when Embiid was first active, assuming that he was able to get through the series without an injury, and I don't really think he's totally 100%. I really didn't see a realistic path where they were going to lose this series. I thought that they were for sure going to win it, probably even in 5 or 6 games. And now these last couple of games, and I still think they're better than Atlanta. They have just totally shit the bed the last couple of games. Like, this is completely nerves related, in my opinion. Even Simmons talked about it after the last game when he was asked, you know, what's up with the free throw shooting? And I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he basically said it's mostly mental. And then Embiid the last 2 games, 0 of 13 from the field 2 games, 0 of 12 from the field 2 games ago. Then 3 of 9 from the field in the second half last game. To me, a lot of that's mental, and I think a lot of it's pressure related.
It could certainly be. With Ben Simmons, the dude's just a head case at this point. But like when it comes to Embiid, I think a lot of that has to do with fatigue down the stretch too. The guy's legitimately playing with a torn meniscus, and I think he's had some really gutty performances. I'm not willing to absolve him of everything after game 4, but game 5, it just looked, I mean, he was gassed, and still him and Curry were the only players with any buckets in the second half. So I feel your pain, maybe not to the same extent, but I had a sizable bet on the Sixers fourth quarter money line in game 4, which was even money. Actually, it might've been even plus money. It was Doc Rivers calls a timeout with a minute and a half into the fourth. I wait till the timeout break returns. I see that he's got the same bench out there that he called the timeout because of. Then he replaces everyone with the starters. I'm like, all right, dude, I got 10 minutes of starters here. They just need to win this quarter by 1 point. They not only lose the quarter, but they lose the entire game. So, you know, that it's been rough. And they've been a tough team to bet this series for sure.
Dude, and the other thing I don't get about Doc Rivers as a whole, first of all, I think it's the biggest blown leads in the playoffs over the last 2 years. It's like 6 of the top 8 biggest blown leads are by Doc Rivers coach teams. And then number 2, also last game, the Sixers were up, was it 83 to like 59 or something like that?
26-point lead.
Yeah, with 2 minutes left in the third quarter, and they have 3 all-NBA defensive players. You would think at that point, even if they scored 0 points heading in, you'd think they'd be able to hang on to the lead, and not the case.
Yeah, outscored 40-19. I wouldn't be surprised if they go home after tonight with the way they've played. We'll see what type of performance, we'll see what type of team this is, and what type of coach Doc Rivers is. Because needless to say, I'm not sold on Doc Rivers yet. The guy doesn't know how to stagger starters in the playoffs. If that's an issue or a block that we can't get past, then I don't know what to say. And how shocked are you that the Clippers have an opportunity without Kawhi to go 4 straight and take down the Jazz in 6?
Very surprised. Although with that said, Donovan Mitchell did not look healthy at all last game. He was hobbling a lot, and I definitely think that was a contributing factor. He did not play well. And Mike Conley, who this is going to be a big DFS talking point tonight, it appears Mike Conley is going to play today. Donovan Mitchell's listed as questionable. I expect him to play though, but that's going to really impact all of the value across the Utah Jazz. And I don't think Conley's going to play full minutes, but I think number one, he's going to impact the game to the point where I think it matters for the spread of the game. But I also think it makes a lot of these guys not very appealing fantasy options. But Mike Conley is really underrated, and I think does a lot more for that Utah Jazz team than the general public tends to think.
For sure. And I was scouring our own oddshopper.com for Mike Conley props today. And there's 1 or 2 books that actually put Conley props out there. So depending on where you stand on that, and Greg and I are going to get into everything right now, there could be some really good opportunities there. I know a lot of people are going to look at the Anthony Davis situation. They're going to look at the James Harden situation and then kind of parlay that knowledge into Mike Conley. But then you have someone like Joel Embiid who's playing on a torn meniscus. And if you were thinking the same thing was going to happen to him and you bet all of the unders, you're probably in pretty bad shape at this point. So we got a lot to get into. First things first, though, hit that thumbs up. We're happy to have everybody with us here on a Friday night, taking you into the weekend. Greg, I just went out and bought 2 massive bottles of Tullamore Dew and Jameson because, we're getting down this weekend, fella. But first, we got to wrap this show up and put out some good content, hopefully some good analysis. Well, we will have good analysis with Greg here, but if you haven't done so, hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and check out our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. They got an awesome offer for everybody today. You know those YSRPs, Yahoo Sports Rewards points. They're as good as cash. Use them on the site to play and win real money. Use them for the contest. If you go over to Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports right now and use the promo code Awesemo20, all caps, all one word, Awesemo20, and all you have to do is deposit $5, you'll immediately get $20 worth of Yahoo Sports Rewards points to put in any contest you want. $20 in YSRPs. This is not a drip bonus or anything like that. You get straight $20 to use on any contest or any contests of your choosing. All you have to do is deposit the minimum of $5. Awesemo20, all one word. Check it out. And make sure you're using Awesemo's tools and projections for Yahoo to help you take down any contest you decide to jump into with them YSRPs that you've received so gracefully tonight. All right, man, let's do it. Philadelphia laying 3 points, 223 total in Atlanta. Game 6, Hawks lead 3-2. Let's kick it off with Joel Embiid coming off a monster 73 fantasy point performance in a loss.
Yeah, so I think the key here is it doesn't even matter that the knee is bum at this point, right? And I think we're all pretty clear he's not 100%, although most players at this point of the season are not 100%. This is an elimination game from the Sixers, and we've seen in other elimination spots teams willing to play their star players massive amounts of minutes, or at least key games, right? So the other day, the Nets play in Game 5 against the Bucks. Kevin Durant plays all 48 minutes. So I think that it's reasonable to think that Joel Embiid is going to play a little bit more than we've seen from him in recent games. So I actually gave him 40 minutes today, and that seems kind of like an absurd minutes projection for Joel Embiid, except given the situation of the game, what does it matter if his knee's a little bum right now? Because if you limit his minutes, then there's a good chance they don't win. They've been terrible without him on the court, without him on the floor this series. Dwight Howard has been miserable. The plus minus for Dwight Howard compared to Joel Embiid, that's been the difference in the series, more or less. So I think Embiid sees even more of an uptick in minutes than he's seen so far. And to me, that makes him the overall number one guy to pay up for on the slate.
In a game like this, didn't you kind of feel that coming into Game 5 after what we saw 0 for 12 in the second half of Game 4, that Embiid was just he's done this many times, and maybe you could tell me it's narrative based, fine, but he's done it so many times where he just comes out guns a-blazing and knocks down everything. He's far more aggressive. He's the one guy on this team, and this isn't to denigrate anyone else, but he's the one dude on this team that when they're losing those type of games, he looks legitimately pissed off. I mean, the guy has a crying meme of him, Greg, from losing in that Toronto game. You have to think that he comes out, and whether or not he's effective or efficient is going to be firing away early and often, and super hard on the defensive side of the ball too.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because you said not to denigrate anybody else, but I have a feling you might denigrate some other Sixers players, and it kind of was meant to shot at them anyway, because it's kind of hard not to right now.
We're only 10 minutes into the show.
Yeah, we've got the next. So listen, we've got 4 teams to talk about over an hour. We're probably going to spend, whatever, a few minutes on Embiid. Then we're just going to rip Tobias Harris and Ben Simmons for, 45 minutes, and there'll be 5 minutes for the last game of this slate.
That makes sense to me. I'm sure Chad understands as well. But I'm with you. I mean, listen, Joel Embiid's production has been fantastic, and at this point I'm almost hesitant to blame anything on that knee at times. Like I say, maybe he got tired, who knows, maybe it's conditioning, I don't know, but he looks perfectly fine early in these games. I know he gets treatment, but he's been 60 plus DK points in all but 2 games. One was 40 or 58. The other, he shot 4 for 20 and still racked up 21 rebounds. So like the stocks upside, the rebound upside, he's gotten so much better at passing out of double teams, which to me is important because instead of a turnover, you're getting an assist, where last year it'd be like 5 turnovers and 1 assist. Now it's 5 assists and 1 turnover. All of that stuff is great to me. So I have no disagreements there, even if they lose this game. But what about Harris coming off this 2 for 11 performance? I mean, outright disaster of a game from start to finish from Harris in a spot that they lose by 3 points.
I'm kind of curious to see. So on Fanduel, you kind of have no choice. He's going to be really highly owned because there's only a handful of viable power forward options. So we currently have him projected to be the most rostered player on all of Fanduel. That seems sensible to me. On DraftKings, we currently have him projected for 35% ownership. Gut feeling, I think he's going to be underweight to that number. I think that, where a lot of our numbers going to be data oriented. I think a lot of people, especially people that are hand building lineups, are going to see Ben Simmons or Tobias Harris or Tobias Harris' name come up, and they're just gonna be like, I don't want to play these guys. So I think that he's actually going to end up going a little bit under owned today, both Harris and Simmons for that matter. And, I think that the last game was as poorly as Tobias Harris could have possibly played. But with that said, you only have to go back 2 games to find him playing, like as well as he could possibly play. So other games in the series, game 1, 43 DraftKings points, game 2, 38, game 3, 39. I think this is a pretty good bounce back spot for Tobias Harris. Last game clearly sucked, but it was such an outlier for him. And he really is a perfect third piece for this Philadelphia team, his ability to shoot, to space the floor. He's also been, a solid defender for most of the season. So I'm not too concerned about what happened last game. I'm going to look past it because it's just one game, and it's arguably the worst game he's played all season. Yeah,
it was dreadful, but you can't take one game and just assume that that's the same Tobias Harris we're going to get, because if that's your logic, then you're ignoring the fact that he's got 20 plus points in every other game this series. I mean, it was bad. It's as bad, like you said, it's as bad as it's going to get. And his price isn't egregiously high anywhere, but Ben Simmons is the talking points when it comes to Ben Simmons. The guy he missed 10 free throws. It's the most free throws anyone's missed in a game all season, including the regular season and the postseason. It's not great. The biggest thing for me is, like, if this starts happening again, does Doc Rivers fold under pressure and take Ben Simmons off the floor? Because at the end of last game, he actually did take him off for a period there because he became a liability. He could not make them. And it's not the fact, I said this to Josh yesterday, but I think it's important. It's not the fact that he's missing the free throws as much as it is that now when he's missing free throws, you're taking possessions out of the hands of guys that you can trust to knock down threes or get easy buckets instead of getting 1 or 0 points from the line. That's the biggest concern. I don't want to count all the free throws he misses, but I do want to count all the possessions they lose when McMillan sends Ben Simmons to the line 14 times.
So Trae Young and Lou Williams last game played, it was something like 14 minutes together. The Hawks had a 92.4 defensive rating in those minutes, which should be impossible because both of them are egregious defenders. And that's where I think a lot of what happened with Philly was them kind of folding under pressure and shooting themselves in the foot. Obviously, Ben Simmons' free throw shooting, like I said, self-admitted that a lot of it he felt was a mental thing. But I mean, beyond that, I'm listening to some of the discourse and seeing what people are saying about Ben Simmons on Twitter. There's for sure flaws there, and I think he deserves a lot of heat after last game. In the past, I think Simmons has gotten heat that he didn't really deserve. I think he does deserve it now. But it's another thing, too, where people now, I think, have gone so far the other way on Ben Simmons. A week ago, people were outraged that Rudy Gobert won Defensive Player of the Year over Ben Simmons. Today, I look on my timeline and people don't even think Ben Simmons is an NBA starting caliber player. So, I mean, Ben Simmons it's another guy who I look at his ownership on DraftKings right now. And also FanDuel versus DraftKings is going to be a little bit different because of positionality. But Ben Simmons, 28% projected ownership on DraftKings. And the build I currently have, I'm overweight to the field on Simmons. He's still a triple-double threat. And the other thing, too, is if you look at the overall, just some of the storylines of this playoffs, we've seen a bunch where just the public gets really low on individual players. And then they have really big games afterwards, and they end up going a little bit under-owned just because people say, like, hey, this guy sucks in the playoffs. This guy isn't good, period. Paul George last game, although he was a popular play anyway, but Paul George generally, people don't like to roster him in the playoffs because of the, pandemic P, playoff P narrative. Giannis last game. Before that game, everybody's like, hey, Giannis folds under pressure, can't guard Durant, all this. And then he crushed the Nets last game.
Happened with Chris Middleton earlier in the series, too.
Yeah, Chris Middleton as well. Chris Paul has gotten a bad rap in the playoffs at times. He's been great this year. So to me, I think Ben Simmons is another guy who could go under-owned. He has a terrific individual matchup against Trae Young. He just has to be more aggressive. And even if you go back only 2 games ago, he had 11 points, 12 rebounds, 9 assists. That was 45 DraftKings points. One more assist, he gets the triple-double bonus, and he finds himself right around 50 DraftKings points. So to me, another guy, Ben Simmons, I think is going to go a little bit under-owned just based on the narrative surrounding him.
I'm with you. One of the props that I have today, and I said it this morning as well, that I'm sure people won't be stoked about, Ben Simmons over 13.5 points. If it's a mental game, then I'm probably like, if it's so much of a mental game that he's just crippled, then I'm losing this bet. But I don't see any reason Ben Simmons can't get 14 points in a game like this. Hell, even if he had made a few additional free throws, he's up close to that. And only attempted 4 shots in that game. So yeah, Ben Simmons to me over 13.5 is one I like a lot. You can check all of that out at oddshopper.com. It's totally free. Shop around all different books. That's the way you have sustainable success betting. Track your bets as well. You can set a watch list, and there's an insane amount of offers of books that are just trying to get people over there. They don't care who they steal you from. They'll get you over there at any cost necessary. So be sure to take advantage of that as well. But yeah, you can search props by name, by team, all of that stuff. It's so much easier to navigate than some of these other books that make it pretty difficult. And the biggest thing, you can see the available odds lined up right next to each other at every single book. Know which one you want to hit, know which one you want to take advantage of. That's where you get the edge in a hyper competitive sports betting, where the books get smarter, the people behind the scenes get smarter. And obviously, it's not easy to find good edges advantage. This is one way to do it. All right. What about Seth Curry coming off a huge game? I mean, him and Embiid were the only 2 players on the Sixers in game 5 that looked remotely decent. I know he's a bit expensive on FanDuel, 5,400 on DraftKings, very scoring dependent, but can we look to Seth Curry as another guy who could give us 6 or 7 threes and put us in position to win a tournament?
Yeah, so I don't like Seth Curry for some of the same reasons I like Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris, but the inverse. So Seth Curry is coming off arguably the best game of his career, certainly in a big spot. That was the best I could ever remember him playing. And the price on FanDuel, to me, that is way too high for Seth Curry, especially with everybody else active. So Seth Curry at 6,200 on FanDuel, also a loaded shooting guard position where we have Paul George, we have Donovan Mitchell, we have some of the cheap guys like Terrence Mann, Furkan Korkmaz. So 6,200 for Seth Curry, and he's still picking up ownership. I think he's going way over-owned, and that's just a product of what happened last game with him. So Seth Curry then on DraftKings, it is a little bit more palatable of a price tag at 5,400, but he's being rostered in 27% of lineups. And I have Seth Curry right now projected for 26 fantasy points. So, that's fine. It won't kill you at 5,400, but he's also really popular. And other than him going out and making, 70% of his threes again, I don't think there's a real significant ceiling there because he's so dependent on 3-point shooting. So if he was somebody with, really low ownership, then I think I could get there. But for me right now with Seth Curry, I don't even have him in my player pool.
Yeah, I think it might be a little bit easier to justify if there weren't 5 Clippers in a similar price range with Kawhi Leonard out too,
Yeah, there's just so many points per dollar, better value plays. And like I said, I have him projected right around 5x value on a 2-game slate. Generally, that's just a guy like, okay, whatever. He ends up in 5-10% of my lineups. I don't mind that. But when the field is rostering him in nearly a third of lineups, it's just too much, and it's a lot of recency bias.
So I honestly wouldn't be shocked if Dwight Howard doesn't even see the floor tonight after last game's horrendous performance, minus 14 and 8.5 minutes. Just an absolute liability at this stage of the game. Now, I'm not saying he won't. I just wouldn't be surprised. But even if he does, his minutes have to be curtailed even further back than they were. And you might see some Ben Simmons at the 5 for all we know. Point being, though, Greg, outside of Matisse Thybulle last game, not a single starter really got enough run to make any bit of a dent. I guess your only hope here is that Shake maybe gets hot and Doc leaves him on the floor, but Maxi's not playing any minutes. George Hill's been awful, at least from a fantasy standpoint. And Matisse Thybulle, despite being solid defensively, is a complete offensive liability and really isn't going to get you any production, even if he plays 23 minutes. But is he cheap enough? And are you willing to take shots on anyone from this bench?
Sure. So specific to Fanduel, Matisse Thybulle, just because of the defensive stat capabilities, that and also the small forward options are so thin on Fanduel. We have Nick Batum is the most expensive small forward on Fanduel. Then it's Bojan Bogdanovic, Danilo Gallinari, Matisse Thybulle. And then the next guys are all min price, where it's like Paul Reed, Solomon Hill, Tony Snell. None of those guys I think are playable. So Matisse Thybulle, I think, just kind of has to be rostered on Fanduel. And the other thing also is he's always somebody who's a better Fanduel producer than Draftkings anyway, because Thybulle could go out, he could play 18 minutes and have 2 steals and 3 blocks, and just that in itself ends up being a viable fantasy game. But, close to min price with a defensive stat upside, I think Thybulle's in play on Fanduel. For Draftkings, only somebody to consider in single game.
Okay. And pretty much no one else from the Sixers team, right?
I don't mind Korkmaz as a salary saving play on Draftkings. Still priced sub 4K. And, his minutes have been fairly substantial in his last 2 games. 25 minutes in the first start, and last game he played 29 minutes. And the other thing also is pretty key about the first start he got against the Hawks is even though he only ended up playing 25 minutes, he closed that game, which, shows that Doc Rivers has some form of faith in him. And then 29 minutes last game. So not like a core player or anything like that. But if you end up with 15 to 20% Furkan Korkmaz, it's sub 4K price tag, for a 2-game slate, I think is good value.
Derek, if you ask that question 17 more times, maybe we'll answer it.
Yeah. By the way, also wrong game. So I don't know if you've noticed how we're doing it, but there's a very specific formula here. It's game by game. We're talking about individual teams. We'll get to Royce O'Neal. We'll get to the Utah Jazz eventually. They're the next game.
It's amazing. Random Trash says, no one tell him shit. People are already rallying for the cause. Let's talk about the Atlanta Hawks. And hey, while we're at it, we are, what do we got? 69. Josh would appreciate that. 69 likes away from 200. Let's get us there. If you haven't done so yet, I won't hold it against you. But if you don't do it now, we could have some problems. But in all seriousness, it helps us out a ton with the YouTube algorithm. So does subscribing to the channel and all of that good stuff. So we appreciate it. All right, let's talk Hawks. Trae Young, really brutal. Not brutal, but rough first half of that game. Finishes with 39 points, Greg. And, at one point his live prop was at like 27 in that game. Maybe even been 24 at one point. Finishes with 39. I thought there could be a stage where the starters aren't in for the final 5 minutes, but that was very much not the case. And he ended up blowing up, at least in the scoring department.
Yeah, so Trae Young, I think here's one of the issues that I have with Trae Young that we kind of have to contextualize him on this slate is he's 10,300 on FanDuel, and then on DraftKings he's 9,900. So it's not will Trae Young play well or not, it's will he score more fantasy points than guys like Paul George, Joel Embiid, and Donovan Mitchell. Because Mike Conley's back, I do have Trae Young project for more fantasy points than Mitchell, but I have a pretty big gap in between Trae Young and then Paul George and Joel Embiid. So with that said, Trae Young currently project for 31% ownership on DraftKings. That's a number that I want to be underweight to the field on. Then on FanDuel, projected to be in about 40% of lineups. That's also a number that I'm underweight to the field on just because there's other guys that I prefer to pay up for than Trae Young. I think Trae Young should play relatively well from a fantasy standpoint, just not as well as guys like Embiid or Paul George.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I've kind of felt that way all series. Whenever Trae Young is on the slate and you've got multiple games, it feels like he's never really a priority when you've got Embiid and now you have Paul George and you've had a ton of other high-priced players that are in good spots or favorable enough price points. I have to talk to you about the Capela price point though, because he's now $6,700 on DraftKings. That's $1,000 cheaper than he was at the start of this series. He's $7,100 on FanDuel. And I understand where the value can be seen in this. But I think it's also tough to overlook that for a player like Capela, whose shot volume is already low, relies on, alley-oops, relies on rebounds and block shots and not getting in foul trouble, This is a really, really ugly matchup for him, and it's kind of shown throughout the series. He's had one or two decent rebounding games, but all in all, the Sixers pose a pretty difficult matchup for Capela on both sides of the floor. So is he cheap enough now to say, you know what, it's a tough matchup, but I can overlook that because of his salary?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a fairly neutral play in about a third of lineups right now on DraftKings. That's right around where I am with them. Also, the other thing with Capela too is not only is it a bad matchup, he's gotten in foul trouble a lot this series trying to guard Joel Embiid. So 5 personal fouls last game. He's actually picked up 5 or more personal fouls in 3 of the 5 games so far. So that's something else that's limited his minutes a little bit. But Clint Capela, just because the price point has now come down on DraftKings, that does put him in play for me, just to the point though where I want to be even with the field. On FanDuel, I'd much rather pay up for Rudy Gobert or Joel Embiid. Clint Capela is still $7,100 on FanDuel. I think Rudy Gobert for $900 more. That's a much more favorable spot. And then if I'm paying up, Joel Embiid at the top, kind of in a price range of his own.
Bogdanovic was dreadful last game, and I'll tie this into Lou Williams as well, and you can hit on both. Obviously, the very early foul trouble for Bogdanovic with 5 fouls early or midway through the third quarter opened the door to more playing time for Lou Williams. But Lou Williams got hot and Bogdanovic never came back. I mean, didn't close that game out, had nothing to do with them coming back from a 26-point deficit. Do you like Bogdanovic to get back to his routine, 40 minutes of play tonight or more? And is there any path for Lou Williams to get those additional minutes once again and give us a decent game at almost minimum salary on DraftKings, of course, not on FanDuel?
Yeah, what's funny? So the Hawks have really heavily been utilizing hacking Ben Simmons, setting him to the free throw line. And while that worked last game, one thing I thought that was really weird is they were using Bogdanovic and Kevin Huerter to send him to the free throw line, and they just used up fouls on Bogdanovic and Huerter. To me, it's like, I mean, they ended up winning the game, so whatever. What do I know? But why not throw Tony Snell or Solomon Hill in there to foul him? Guys who don't matter. Like, why using guys who are actually core rotation pieces to foul him? And then in a funny way, it really worked multiple ways because number one, Simmons didn't make the free throws. And then number two, these guys get into foul trouble because they're intentionally fouling Simmons. They have no choice but to bring Lou Williams off the bench. And then Lou Williams just gets really hot and hits a bunch of shots. So it was a bunch of really weird factors that led to the reduced minutes for Bogdanovic and Huerter, and therefore led to more minutes for Lou Williams. I mean, I guess it's possible that happens again, but, we've seen Bogdanovic play substantial minutes basically throughout the playoffs. Now, I can't imagine it's going to be something they want to do with him again. And the games prior to last game, 42 minutes. 39 and a half minutes, 41 minutes, 36 minutes in game one. I think that Bogdanovic is much more likely to play 40 minutes than he is to play, under 30 again.
I'm with you. The only other thing I can say is like if maybe Huerter is just terrible and Lou will picks up some additional run for Kevin Huerter, but I think it's unlikely. The only reason I bring it up is because he's, I think, $3,200 on DraftKings. So he's dirt cheap, and you don't have a lot of those guys that are just really, really discounted that could get some additional minutes. But yeah, it's certainly more of an exception to the rule from Lou Will than we should be expecting. Let's talk about the rest of the Hawks, and I'll let you go wherever you want here, Greg, really, because you have Collins, you have Danilo Gallinari, who had a pretty decent impact late in the late stages of that game. And Kevin Huerter, who's been starting but has not been by any stretch any good at all. 0 for 7 last game, blanked from beyond the arc, 0 for 4. He's coming off, 2 of 3 really, really bad games.
All right, so this is probably not somebody you expect me to talk about, but the small forward position is so thin on FanDuel that Solomon Hill is projecting for 10% ownership right now. And to me, that is just a terrible play. And that's an easy guy to be underweight to the field on. So 10% ownership to Solomon Hill, who might not even see the court. If he does see the court, it's probably not going to be so for
I thought you were
minutes.
saying you're coming in overweight on him. I was going to say that is not what I was expecting.
No. Solomon Hill, the last 4 games, he's played 8 minutes in a start and scored 2 fantasy points. Then in a start, he played 14 minutes and scored 1 fantasy point. Then he was a DNP coach's decision. Then last game, he plays 13 minutes and scores 2 fantasy points. So to me, it's crazy that the field is getting here to double-digit ownership. So he's somebody who shouldn't be significant, but he's picking up a lot of ownership. And so I think one of the easiest ways to gain some leverage here on a crappy small forward position is just don't play Solomon Hill.
Can we go back to Collins or Danilo Gallinari, who's 4,500, played 30 minutes last game, 30 minutes in game 3 as well, 26 in game 2 and 23 in game 4. So he's kind of been all over the map. And I think a lot of that's just contingent on if he's playing well or not off the bench. but Gallo has at least had some upside in terms of what this playing time looks like. And he's not afraid to shoot either. $4,500 on DK is actually a little bit cheaper than I anticipated. $5,000 on Fanduel, small forward eligible.
Yeah, so FanDuel, no brainer, he has to be in the player pool because there's only 4 viable small forward options. Yep. So that aside, there's not really a lot of analysis I get there. You just, if you're playing on FanDuel, he has to be in the player pool because the small forward is getting minutes. On DraftKings, he is also somebody who I'm getting to, but not a ton. And the main reason being is that he's priced similarly to Marcus Morris and Nick Batum, who to me are just far better fantasy plays that I think have much better minutes floors, much better minute ceilings. And then also they could do more than just shoot the basketball, which is solely reliant what Danilo is for his fantasy production. So Gallinari in my player pool on FanDuel and DraftKings, but DK, there's other guys I'd rather get to if you're only playing a handful of lineups.
Boom, 200 likes. Thanks, fellas. Appreciate you. Almost 1,000 watching on a Friday night. We'll keep this one going. Utah and the LA Clippers. I have one question for the Clippers when we get there that I think will be really helpful to everybody watching, because they're probably going to run into the same problem and they're going to say, shit, this is really a chalky lineup. And we could get into, how much you're trying to avoid that today on a 2-gamer, not a single gamer as well. But first, let's talk about the Jazz here. Donovan Mitchell, you mentioned it right at the top of the show. The guy does not look very good did not look very good in the last game. And that's mostly saying that he looked like he was hurt, dealing with that ankle injury. He's been stellar all series long, and he's one of the big reasons they went up 2-0. He's a legitimate game time decision, it appears, and Mike Conley's trending towards playing. So the backcourt shakeup that we could see tonight, it's tough to even predict any of that right now. How are you attacking that, given that we have a 7:30 game and then nothing else until 10:30? Are there any ways to mitigate Donovan Mitchell being in or out?
So I feel like I have a good read on this, which is I have built my lineups assuming that Donovan Mitchell is going to play and not really have any restrictions, but potentially not be 100%. So I gave him a little bit of a reduction in his rate stats just because of that. And then as for the Mike Conley end, I assume that Conley is going to play, but is going to be a little bit limited, kind of like what we saw from James Harden the last couple of games, though maybe not to quite the same extent. So I gave Mike Conley 26 minutes for today. The significance of giving him 26 minutes is that's usage that comes away from Donovan Mitchell. That's playing time that comes away from Jordan Clarkson. It's usage that comes away from Bogdanovic and Royce O'Neal. It's a lot of playing time that comes away from Joe Ingles. So even if we say that Mike Conley is going to play and be fairly limited, it kills so much of the value that we've had on Utah in the last couple of games.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And that's the tough part. Like I told you, I was searching for Mike Conley props, because does it not kind of, and again, this is just my intuition here, which could be total bullshit, but does it not feel like we've seen a lot this postseason already of players playing in games that they would never play, 0% chance of playing in the regular season? Like Anthony Davis, there's one of them, horrible decision. James Harden seems okay, but you and I both know that he'd be out for another 10 days probably if this wasn't the playoffs. Joel Embiid, would Joel Embiid come back that quick with a torn meniscus? Absolutely zero chance. Is Mike Conley just a repeat of what we've already seen from the first 2 rounds? I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to know. One thing that is kind of positive, though, is it did seem like he was kind of close to playing in each of the last couple of games. And
you're
right. So it like the other spots were like Anthony Davis. That was one where it just seemed like they just played him because they had to. And then James Harden, too. Even James Harden had said, that he had been, I thought Harden was going to be out for the entire playoffs, but that was another one where I think they really played him by necessity. And he even said as much. There was no indication leading up to those other games that Harden could potentially play. Then they just threw him out there. To me, with Mike Conley, this is a little bit different because they have been ramping up towards playing. So I don't think he's going to be full go or anything like that, but I think he's going to be in and give them, some sort of production while he's out there. The other thing to add with Mike Conley also, they've been so cautious with him. He's had 5 separate hamstring injuries since getting traded to Utah before last season. I'm not sure if they're all the same leg. Let me see if I could see that actually. This year it's been the right hamstring every time. Last year, I can't see from last year, but yeah, I wonder if it was the same leg every time. But either way, he's had so many of reoccurrences of these hamstring injuries that they've been pretty cautious with him. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just thought like, hey, we're playing this series fairly competitively. Maybe Mike Conley could play, maybe he can't, but they didn't feel like they needed to push him out there. And now I think they kind of feel like they are in a spot where they can use him. So I do think he's going to look better than Harden or what Anthony Davis looked like.
Yeah, that's well reasoned. My only thing is it's an elimination game, and we've seen teams get pretty, you know, they put it's hard to discern whether or not he's okay when it's elimination game, but you're right. He's at least been semi close. And the injury isn't nearly as fresh as some of these other guys. I mean, Conley hasn't played since the 2nd of June. So he's at least had some time. Granted, he's an older player too, but yeah, I mean, I guess let's close out the backcourt, and you've pretty much already hit on most of this, but with your assumption that Mitchell plays, and I think we both expect Conley to be active as well. Do you want, are you taking, just to recap this, any heavy stand on either side of that, on Mitchell or Conley?
So I have no interest in Conley from a DFS perspective, especially because giving him 26 minutes, you know, that just has him as a guy who I expect to score somewhere around 25 fantasy points. And given that Conley is still, you know, fairly expensive on both sides, he's 7,500 on Fanduel and still picking up 11% ownership. That to me is not a good play. On DraftKings, Mike Conley is 6,800 and only picking up 4% ownership. But even so, if I have him project for 25 fantasy points at those kind of price tags, it doesn't make him viable to me. So he's not in my player pool, but still he really hurts the production of all these other guys, because it's, even if he plays 20 minutes, that's still 20 minutes that has to come away from guys like Jordan Clarkson and Joe Ingles.
Yeah, big time. I mean, Jordan Clarkson takes a massive hit in a game like this, and at his current price point, I don't see any way you're getting this. $6,200 on DraftKings seems completely just impossible to get to. $5,500 on FanDuel. It still doesn't seem like there's a ton of meat on the bone there, but is 55 on FanDuel at least somewhat reasonable to you, or are you just wiping Conley off entirely tonight?
So Jordan Clarkson in the build.
I'm sorry, Clarkson. Yeah.
Yeah. So Clarkson, the build I have right now on FanDuel, I have him in 25% of my lineups. And I think that's almost dead even with the field. Actually, Clarkson, we currently have projected for 24% ownership. So yeah, pretty flat even with the field. So the thing with Clarkson though, is even if he's only going to play, 22, 26 minutes, he still has that. I mean, we know he's going to come and play for our fantasy lineups. Like there's no off button on Jordan Clarkson. If he's in the game, he thinks he's the best player on the court. He's shooting. So I still think there's upside in that price tag on FanDuel for Clarkson, but DraftKings, it's a no-go.
So there's no off button for Jordan Clarkson. There's no rebound, assist, block, or steal button for Bojan Bogdanovic. Now, the guy can definitely score, right? I mean, coming off a 32-point performance, but the peripherals on a guy like this are just so dreadful that if he's not giving you production as a scorer, you're pretty much shit out of luck. And I think we have to understand that going into this, that Bogdanovic is not going to give you big numbers anywhere outside of scoring. He's $5,900 on DraftKings. Seems reasonable enough, but now you get Conley back in, and we don't know Mitchell's real status. He's also $5,900 on FanDuel. Any thoughts on him here before we move on?
Yeah, so I think you hit on the key point there, which is just if he is not hitting threes, he's not bringing you anything else. He scored 32 points last game on 9 threes. He had 3 rebounds, no assists, and no other stats. So realistically, he had a good game relative to a 2-game slate, but he scored 38 fantasy points, right around a 6,000 price tag on DraftKings last game. And that was while hitting 9 threes. So if he hits 2 less threes, he doesn't even have a good fantasy game. If he hits 7 threes and scores 26 real life points in that game, it's not a good fantasy game. But the fact that he makes, 9 of 11 threes or whatever, 9 of 12, that makes him that's what he needs to do to really be viable at
9
this kind of
17.
Yeah. So it's just not something I could really rely on. For FanDuel, once again, I just don't have anything creative to add here. Nick Batum, Bojan Bogdanovic, Danilo Gallinari, Matisse Thybulle. Those are the only small forwards that have projected to play a decent amount of minutes. So he has to be in play on FanDuel. I think that Batum is the stronger option if we're paying up for one of the guys in that price range. Batum 6,200, Bogdanovic 59. So that's really the only thing I have to add here. By necessity, we have to play Bogdanovic, but if you have the choice, I think Batum is the better play.
I don't even want to ask you about Royce O'Neal because somebody's I just want to pretend he doesn't exist. But I'll have you close out Utah. You can go wherever you'd like to go with the Utah Jazz, because I want to give us at least 15 minutes for this Clippers team. This is where it gets real interesting. Yeah,
so Royce O'Neal on DraftKings at 5,000, not somebody that I really think warrants much consideration. On FanDuel, he's currently projected for 40% ownership at a 5,300 price tag. So of the viable power forward options on FanDuel, that is Royce O'Neal, Marcus Morris, Tobias Harris, and John Collins, I think that Royce O'Neal is the weakest play of the 4. Also, George Niang is picking up nearly 10% ownership just because people are looking for somebody to punt with, kind of similar to why Solomon Hill is picking up ownership. But I have no interest in rostering Niang and Royce O'Neal. To me, of the viable ones, like I said, underweight to the field on him. I only have about half as much exposure as the field.
All right. 3 teams down, 1 to go. Before we do, though, I should probably tell you, you can get 25% off your whole first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Everything on the site: ownership, player projections, top stack tool, boom bust tool, top pitchers tool. And it's not like all of the tools we talk about for basketball: ownership, projections, player, like everything. All of that can be found for MMA, UFC, for PGA, for NASCAR, for you name it, all of these sports. Like, you get all of the tools for everything. And the great part is, you could ask, like Adam, I always use as an example because he's crushed playing UFC last year. He crushed playing NHL. Maybe it was 2 years ago. He had no idea about these sports. Now that pisses some people off. They say, I know these sports so well. Why is it these people that don't know them are winning? Well, they're just smart and they know how to utilize really good tools from people that do know the sport. So, that's how it works. Anyway, Alex Baker, Awesemo himself, created these tools and uses them to win a lot of money on his own. If you use the promo code NBA Deeper Dive, all one word, all caps, you got to figure out a way to fix that. I mean, that's just a lot of prerequisites to get your foot in the door. But NBA Deeper Dive, all one word, all caps, will get you 25% off your first week. If you want to go for a month, all sports, single sport, you can do that. Make a real investment out of it. Go for a year. Get the Fantasy Cruncher add-on. All of that's available. And I'll throw this last one out at you. The Showdown content that we have coming up on YouTube, it's all free. But the Express Pass for less than $5 a week gets you everything, all of our tools, all of our articles, you name it, for Showdown slates. And we're going to have a lot of them in the coming weeks. So whatever you want, we got you covered. Awesemo.com/join, or go to awesemo.com/promos, NBA Deeper Dive, all one word, all caps. And if you have questions, my DMs are open on Twitter. I'm happy to answer them for you with any of these subs. All right, Greg, this is the question I've been waiting to ask you. How many Clippers are you willing to have in a single lineup tonight? If you're crunching, are you setting any restrictions? Are you going to be cool with 5? Is 4 your max on a 2-gamer? How many Clippers are you all right having in the same lineup?
Yeah, so I'm just scrolling through the lineups that I've made on DraftKings. I have as many as 5 in lineups. All of the best value comes from this game. And then not only is there really good value on the Clippers, but we've already talked about the Utah Jazz just now, with Mike Conley likely coming back. That kills a lot of the pricing value there. So all of a sudden now we have a 4-game slate, and one of the teams look really bad from a value perspective, and the Clippers look really good from a value perspective. So they're just such strong plays that I'm not too concerned about having too many of them and some of the negative correlation here. Also, so many of them are cheap, viable options. You have Terrence Mann, Luke Kennard, Nick Batum is too underpriced. So I don't think we really have a choice. I have no issue getting up to 5 Clippers in DraftKings lineups.
Yeah, I think if you were to just run like straight Awesemo projections, unadulterated, untouched, no ownership caps, you're going to get 5 Clippers. I believe I did, at least earlier in the day. I had 5 Clippers in there. And it makes sense. Everything you just said, everything we've talked about throughout the show. Now it's time to dive into them. We'll start it off with the very easy one here, Paul George. And I see chat just constantly talking about, there were a few people saying Paul George was bad chalk last game. And I respect them for showing their faces. That's about where we draw the line. 37, 16, 5, 2, and 1. Just an outright monster game from Paul George with Kawhi Leonard off the floor. I've got a prop for you first, Greg, that may surprise you a little bit. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of projections actually have him below this, but I have my reasons. I have George over 9.5 rebounds. And it sounds like a lot. I get that. But he's gone 10 plus rebounds in 3 of 5 games this series. Every game but last game was Kawhi Leonard was active. He's only played a little more than 120 minutes without Kawhi Leonard on the floor this series. 18.5% rebound rate. Last game, Paul George had an absurd 26 rebound chances. He's averaging 16 rebound chances per game in the postseason, and he's been able to convert a ton of them. So he's a good rebounder that probably doesn't get enough credit for it. Rudy Gobert has been getting pulled away from the basket with the way they're playing him, and he's become, dare I say, at times somewhat of a liability. I think Paul George has many, many opportunities here to get above that 9.5 mark. But talking DFS, what are you doing with PG tonight?
Yeah, so Paul George, to me, if I'm ranking the pay-up options, which, I think is kind of important. We talk about these guys who, his pay-up option on DraftKings, Joel Embiid's a little bit more expensive than Donovan Mitchell, Trae Young, and Paul George, but all of them are within context of each other. I personally have Joel Embiid projected for the most fantasy points of the group. Then Paul George second, Trae Young third, Donovan Mitchell fourth. Donovan Mitchell getting a little bit of a downgrade, one because of the ankle injury, and then two, the expected return of Mike Conley. So Paul George is a very high priority play for me. There's so much value on the Clippers that it's not hard to pay up for a couple of stars in lineups. So I'm getting to a lot of Joel Embiid and I'm getting to a lot of Paul George.
Now, the funny thing, right? And this is kind of where I was going with that. How many Clippers are you cool with the same lineup? If you start a lineup off with George and Embiid, and I've done it multiple times for tonight, you're immediately going to start looking to Reggie, to Marcus Morris, to Batum, right? And then Terrence Mann. You're going to see a lot of those lineups. We talk a lot about the plays, but I think the strategies equally, if not more important on small spots, like small slates like this. Are there any ways to differentiate those type of lineups? Because my guess is a ton of people are going to be doing exactly what you and I have been talking about. Yeah.
So, I mean, kind of, it's a 2-game slate. So there's only so many ways to differentiate in general anyway, unless you're just playing a crazy, end of the bench guy. Like if you're taking a shot on like Rajon Rondo, which I don't think is particularly wise because Rondo was the DNP coach's decision in 3 consecutive games, return to the rotation last game, ends up only playing 9 minutes. So, I mean, it's hard in general, though, to find some sort of contrarian stance for 2-game slates. It's certainly not possible on FanDuel just because there's only so many guys viable at each position. I'm going to look at our current ownership projections. I'm going to see if there's anybody below, say, 15% roster that I think actually has upside.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful for sure.
Let's see.
And, while you look, Greg, it's super tough when all of these benches, something I've been harping on, when all of these benches just get smaller and smaller and all of the starters' minutes get bigger and bigger every single night.
Yeah, the brutal one. So the last couple of games, the showdown contest of the Bucks and the Nets game, they're basically running 5-man rotations. And obviously then the last night's game ends up being a blowout. So a couple of guys who are min-priced, end up playing 2 minutes at the end of the game and they end up being the difference makers in tournaments. But for the most part, yeah, you're only getting 10 guys to choose from in some of these games. If I had to go with somebody, though, for really low ownership that I don't think is an awful play, Ivica Zubac, who I gave 16 minutes to, and that gives him right around 15 fantasy points. He's projected for only 4% ownership today. And, last game we did see Zubac take a step back in his playing time. And actually, I thought he was going to play more minutes than normal without Kawhi there. I thought they might have played some, bigger lineups. But last game, only 8 minutes for Zubac. But if you look at the games before then, 17 minutes, 13, 14, 20. Obviously, these aren't massive totals in terms of playing time, but still, he's a guy who scores right around a fantasy point per minute. And we have seen him play, 18 minutes, 17 minutes in the series. So I think it is possible that he gets up to that. And just given that he's 4% owned, I think that he's worth playing more than 4% in tournaments. It doesn't make him a core player or anything, but if you want to play Zubac's 10% of lineups, I think that's reasonable.
I like that. It just goes to show you what a barren wasteland it is, though,
yeah.
right? Like there's just not a lot out there that's not picking up ownership. And if you pull up our ownership, I'm going to refresh to make sure that I've got the current iteration here. So, okay, so check this out, Greg. Paul George, Nick Batum, Marcus Morris, just giving out free information here. We actually have free content that's usually behind paywall today too. If you're not ready to sign up for a sub, NBA player projections and MLB top pitchers and MMA UFC pro plays are all free, usually behind paywall. We rotate through these things. But George, Batum, Morris, Reggie Jackson are 1 through 4 in projected ownership on Draftkings. I'm not sorting by Clippers. I'm just sorting by highest owned players. On FanDuel, Tobias Harris is up top, but then you have Batum and then Morris at 2 and 3. Paul George is down there, but they're so tightly grouped, like this 40% range. They're so tightly grouped that it's hardly discernible at all. But yeah, the 4 highest projected players on DraftKings right now are all Clippers.
And they should be. And actually, to me, I don't think these guys are going owned enough, actually. At least I'm overweight to a lot of them. So Nick Batum, Marcus Morris, I think both these guys warrant being more than 50% owned by the field because I think
40 minutes.
They're too cheap. They're playing extra minutes without Kawhi. They're getting extra usage. And where else are you going for actual good value on the slate, right? So we talked about Seth Curry earlier and how I think that he's going over owned. So he's in the same price range as these guys, but it shouldn't be a situation where Seth Curry is going 30% owned and then Marcus Morris is going 40% owned. When you look at the difference in at least how I project them and also what I think their role is going to be in the offense. So, right now, Marcus Morris is the second option, basically. Marcus Morris and Reggie Jackson, they're the second and third options for the Utah Jazz right now. Seth Curry is, he was the second option last game, but realistically, he's still behind Joel Embiid. He's still behind Ben Simmons. He's still behind Tobias Harris. There's a lot of other guys that are going to take shots. Beyond Paul George, the shots are totally up for grabs on the Clippers. So as popular as these guys are, I don't think it's enough ownership.
Are you over the field on Terrence Mann as well?
Yeah, so Terrence Mann, I was pretty heavy on Mann last game, and I was surprised in I think it was the $4 on DraftKings last night. I think Terrence Mann ended up being 15% rostered, which I thought was egregiously low. He started in place of Kawhi last game, ends up playing 26 minutes, scores 23 fantasy points. Also had the big highlight down the stretch where he dunked over Rudy Gobert. I think that Terrence Mann is going to start again. I think he's going to play pretty sizable minutes, and at his cheap price, I think he's the best punt play.
Can we get to anybody else from the Clippers here? Obviously, Batum, Morris, George all played 40-plus minutes last game. You love seeing that. Mann played 26 in the starting lineup, and Reggie Jackson still played 37 and is yet another option that's going to be pulling really sizable ownership today as well. Anyone we haven't talked about that you think warrants some attention on the clip?
Yeah, so I mean, Patrick Beverly, Lou Kennard, these are still guys that are going to end up playing extra minutes with no Kawhi there. Lou Kennard last game ends up playing 20 minutes. The one concern I have with Kennard, though, is the field is there pretty heavily. So Kennard currently picking up 20% or 22% ownership on DraftKings we're projecting for. To me, I think that's a little bit too high. I'm underweight to that number. And then Patrick Beverly, another guy who should be playing extra minutes today, and we currently have him projected for a little bit less ownership than Lou Kennard. I actually have Beverly project for more fantasy points than Kennard. So given that Lou Kennard is picking up about 25% more ownership than Beverly, I'd rather flip those numbers and be underweight to Kennard and then maybe a little bit overweight to Patrick Beverly.
All right. So we got a couple minutes to go here. We're going to turn this show over to our boys on the Live Before Lock show. Coming up immediately after us, you got Chris Baggs, you got Eric Linkvist taking you all the way up till 7:30 Eastern time. If we were to put a lineup together right now, Greg, let's say we're throwing it in the $12. No, you know what? Let's do it a little different. Let's say we're throwing, $12 single entry because it's a big enough field and it's a single entry, but you still have to, be smart about it. Who do you start with? Your first three players you're plugging into a lineup.
First three players would probably be Nick Batum, Reggie Jackson, and Marcus Morris. Yeah.
Right. And then you could make the argument. You could be like, well, Paul George, Joel Embiid too, or Terrence. There's going to be so much Joel Embiid, Paul George, 5 Clippers tonight. There has to be, right?
Yes. And that's why I think also if you want to get a little different, it's all relative to a 2-game slate, but if you play somebody like Patrick Beverly, who's projecting for around 10% ownership, you play Ivica Zubac, who's only projected for 4% ownership. These are guys who there's ways you could talk yourself into them having some upside, and they aren't massive chalk. So, it's a 2-game slate, and they're thin plays for sure, but I could see the path to upside for them, and the field isn't on them.
You talked a little bit about Kennard too. We'll close it out with this. You mentioned him and his ownership. Can Kennard be that play where it is kind of strange to me? I'm not going to lie that he's getting not. I thought his ownership would be far off from Terrence Mann just because people love the starter. But if in fact we get another update and Luke Kennard's ownership drops even more, which is possible because Kennard's only $200 or Mann's only $200 more on DraftKings. Could Kennard be kind of the perfect pivot tonight on a slate where people look to go to Mann and everyone else in the Clippers, but he could pick up those Terrence Mann minutes if they aren't where they were last game?
So for me, I would need the number to be below 10% for that to be the number I'd want to pivot to Luke Kennard. Certainly not at 20%. Cause right now where we have Luke Kennard project for over 20% projected ownership, then Terrence Mann at 35%, there should be a bigger gap. So to me, where I would start to make that consideration is if Luke Kennard was under 10%.
All right. Who do you got tonight? You got the Sixers laying 3. You got the Jazz, both elimination games, laying 2.5 on the road, potentially hobbled Mitchell and Mike Conley. We'll find out. Who are you going on both sides?
So I'm going to go with the Sixers just because I'm already invested in that. I haven't bet more on the Sixers, except I can't let go. I'm sticking with the Sixers. But in terms of the team I actually bet, I do have the Utah Jazz -2, I think is the current line. I bet the opening line at 1.5, but still 2. It's not that big of a difference. Kawhi being out and then Mike Conley potentially coming back, I think makes a really big difference. Obviously, Kawhi knows about, everybody's going to know about, but with Conley this year, the Utah Jazz in the regular season, they scored 3.5 points more per 100 possessions when Conley was on the court this year. But then on defense, they allowed 9.7 less points per 100 possessions with Conley on the court. So as long as he's mobile enough to defend some of those guys on the perimeter, I think it's going to make a big difference for the Utah Jazz's defense. And even though we all assume that the Jazz have a good defense, they gave up a ton of points, particularly on the perimeter last game. And I think that Conley can really help shore that up.
All right. Yeah. Depending on where you got it, there's decent closing line value there. DraftKings are -2.5 now, and other spots -2, but it's all the same at this point. I think you're looking at a spot where Utah has to take them to 7. Maybe they won't, but without Kawhi Leonard, I like that. I can't even tell you what I think is going to happen with the Sixers. That's how little confidence I'm sorry. That's how little confidence I have in the outcome, not in the Sixers, that too, but just in the outcome. So I'm laying off the sides on that one, and I'll sit back and make myself miserable. If you wonder why I bought all that alcohol, it's because the Sixers are on tonight and I need something to calm the nerves. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back with you soon. And if you could be so kind while you wait, 38 likes away from that 300 mark. Show some love to your boy, Greg, for putting out great content today. Oh, you know what? We have a super chat. I don't want to ignore this, Greg. If the Clippers from PFOB, whatever that means, if the Clippers lose today, do you think Kawhi will play in Game 7? I don't. Do you?
No, I mean, we don't have an update. His ACL might be torn. We don't have an update on that. They're waiting until the swelling goes down to get imaging on it. So, I mean, obviously, I'm not a doctor. Lofty's not a doctor. Jordan might be a doctor. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on that MRI. My gut feeling is that he's a fairly significant injury.
Good luck to all of you guys tonight. We'll catch you back here soon. Appreciate you tuning in every night. Eric Spags coming up next. Jordan already cued that music. We out. Great stuff, man. It's fun doing a show with you.
Bunch.
What is up, guys? It is time for a little live before lock show where we're getting ownership right before the show. We're getting changes to promos right before the show. Boy, it's an exciting time to be alive here on the Awesemo YouTube channel. But I'm Chris Spags, joined once again by a man who's been doing it since bright and early this morning here for the MLB. Now he's here in the NBA, ready to talk about it all. He's Eric Lindquist. How you doing, Eric?
20 seconds into this show and the Twins lineup comes out, and now I have to change all of the things because Donaldson's not a part of it. I love baseball. It's so much fun. Oh, good. It's good to be talking some NBA. I'm going to quick, you go ahead and hit that promo here at the top as I do a couple fixings. Go ahead.
All right, a couple fixings coming up here for Eric here as the MLB could not be more supportive here of us doing a show for Eric, but we are here to talk about the NBA. We got a 2-game slate and we have a special deal going for you guys. As I hinted at, Yahoo, they're doing it so big that our marketing guys couldn't even update the copy on the sheet we used for reads before the show. That's how hot off the press this is. And that's not a slight to them. It's just more that it's a brand new deal here for you guys just for today. If you use the promo code Awesemo20 over at Yahoo, get yourself $20 in YSRPs if you deposit $5 or more. That is going to be a nice deal for you guys. Obviously, you can play over at Yahoo. We have the Yahoo ownership projections, Yahoo projections on the site at Awesemo, so make sure to check those out. But go play over at Yahoo today. $20 in YSRPs. Those are Yahoo Sports reward points. They're basically as good as money on that site. My pal Waffy and I used to joke a lot during the NFL season about you could spend those YSRPs on anything, but realistically, you could spend them on Yahoo Sports entries over on Yahoo. So go use that promo code Awesemo20 for $20 in YSRPs. That is double what they are normally giving out with the promo code. So really take advantage of that one. Play on Yahoo. Some of our guys here, Rinpack's had a lot of success, but a lot of people have played on Yahoo and done well, whether they be guys like Rinpack or just guys like you or guys and gals like you out there. So make sure to go check that out over at Yahoo. And of course, make sure to check the promo code NBA live before lock at awesemo.com/join. It's going to get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. So the data right now, actually the player projections for the NBA are free today. If you want them every day, as well as the showdown ownership, the showdown projections, all of that's going to be coming up and crucial during the Western Conference Finals, the Eastern Conference Finals, and of course the NBA Finals. Go right now to awesemo.com/join and use that promo code NBA live before lock for 25% off your first week. How are the MLB lineups looking, Eric?
Awful. Everything's awful. This is going to be great. I just torched a bunch of money into the atmosphere. You know what? Actually, no, it's after 5:00 for the lock there. I'm just going to put a dummy in and fix it later on all those lineups. I'll live.
That's all you can do. Live one day at a time. Cody asking, is the Yahoo promo for new users only? I believe it's
everybody.
For all users, actually, was what the notification. Let me just double check to make sure because the ad copy is different here. But yeah, all users, $20 of YSRPs to the next deposit. So if you've already deposited on Yahoo, have no fear. This should apply for you too. Again, the promo code is Awesemo20, Awesemo20 over at Yahoo. Let's talk about this slate though, Eric. And I'm going to actually ask you, normally live before lock, we have a little bit of a formula we do here. We talk about some of the top owned plays, some of the newsworthy moments. But I'm going to ask you, because I know you pay attention to social media and all that, Eric. Is there something you've seen today, whether it be on social, whether it be on YouTube, whether it be on the premium Slack we have at Awesemo? Is there one misconception that you're seeing today a lot more than usual? Because I have one in mind. So this may be a leading question, but I'm just curious if there's anything you're seeing that maybe the public is seeing differently than you are personally approaching on today's slate.
This sounds curious to me. I honestly have no idea where you're going with this. Is this a Ben Simmons reference? Is this a Mike Conley reference? Is this a Donovan Mitchell reference? Is this, I mean, I'm trying to figure out where we're going with this.
So I think it's an important one because I think people who are watching the box scores are going to see one. Oh, I love the anticipation now. That we're going to see one. Lewis Williams, the owner of the Love Wings, as being a guy who's very useful today. And a lot of people may not dig deeper on those numbers. And to be clear, the price tag for me, I think it works for Joel Embiid lineups in particular. That's where I got most of my Lou Williams exposure. And honestly, I got a little more Lou than I would like to get. The field's projected to be at 13% ownership on DraftKings, but I think that number is going to be higher because I think people are going to look at the box scores from last game and go, Lou Williams closed that game. Fantastic play. And this is no disrespect to anybody talking about in the YouTube chat because like you guys your takes are as valid as ours. That's always the thing we say here. It's a community. We're all trying to do this together. But Lou Williams played those minutes because Bogdanovic last game was an absolute disaster. The man got in foul trouble, more foul trouble, missed shots, more foul trouble, didn't close the game because he had 5 fouls and was just worthless all game anyway. So that's one thing to keep in mind here. Lou Williams, Danilo Gallinari, two guys today that I think Gallo you could project more safely for minutes. Lou's still certainly going to get some amount of run, and his price tag on DraftKings is going to make him useful there. But I think if you're playing him on Fanduel, that seems like a mistake, even though it's only going to be 5% of the field. And if somehow this ownership comes up higher than the 13% we have on DraftKings, I'm going to be concerned for anybody playing Lou Williams at heavy volume. So use him as a value play. I think that's totally fine. There's going to be some better ones on the slate, but that was where I was leading you, Eric, is that I think people will look at those numbers and not be willing to go to Bogdan. And I get it. Bogdan has been crap, but he put up 24 shots the game before the last one. Like he's clearly a guy who's been in the rotation, and Atlanta, they're not in elimination mode right now. In fact, they can lose one more and still get another chance at this one. I think in this spot, I'm willing to go back to Bogdan. I didn't get a ton today, definitely not as much as the last slate, but to me, that's one key pivot point, Eric, that I think people may not notice when just going through the popcorn machines or the box scores.
I could have had 15 guesses and I wouldn't have landed on what you were talking about. I had no idea. I didn't, maybe the Twitter sphere, maybe it was, I mean, between the PGA and MLB and NBA live before locks the last 3 days, I have a lot of things circulating, and, I'll see a little bit here and there, but yeah, the Lou Williams thing is surprising. I didn't know that was going to be where you were going with it, but I won't be going to him. I see ownership under 5% there. I understand 4,800 is just dumb. It's a wrong tag for somebody that, he ended up playing 23 minutes. He's the guy who kind of sparked that 26-point comeback there, played pretty much from the 4:55 mark of the third quarter all the way through the rest of that game. That is not going to be happening this time around. And Bogdanovic, when you see Lou Williams go off like that, you leave him in the game. And so props to Nate McMillan for not even bringing Bogdan back in the rest of the way. It wasn't good for my lineups, but you ride the hot hand there. He got back in Philly and just did his thing. I do not see any way that I'm going to play Lou Williams today.
Yeah, I'm playing him a little bit, but I made sure to make sure that my numbers weren't going to be that high on him, because I do have some concerns that people will see that. And that's sort of reading here in a way that the ownership projections will not put you out, as Eric mentioned, 5% on Fanduel, 13%, a little bit more than that on Draftkings projected. And we will do money time here in 20 minutes. Why not one more time here for the NBA Live Before Lock show? I'll give away the top 5 owned plays on Draftkings and Fanduel for free. But I just wanted to me that I know people, I know they see the results, and I know you see a guy at 3,200 and you want to get there. So that's, to me, one play that I would just be cautious with, even if you are playing him a little bit like I am. Let's talk about some other value, though, because I think that's clearly going to be the important part. A guy at the same price tag who's also going to be, I think, a core part of what people are doing today, as well as for me. Terrence Mann, I'll have in about half my lineups today on DraftKings. He's a guy I picked at the start last time out. Certainly can be squeezed a little bit if Lou Kennard plays better, and they also are a little bit less concerned with Lou Kennard getting hunted on defense, though I think we see Mike Conley, and that certainly could be the case a little bit more than it was last time out. But Terrence Mann, I know he's been one of your guys, Eric, all year long. And to me, the spot for him, I believe he's steadily in the mix with the core guys for the Clippers. And that includes Paul George, Marcus Morris, Reggie Jackson, Nick Batum. Those are the guys I'm expecting to have a pretty safe amount of run. Mann, I guess, the most insecure out of all of them, but still a guy at 3,200. If he's going to play the 26 and a half minutes we have projected today in Awesemo, I feel like Terrence Mann is actually the best value play on the slate.
100% agree. I have 75% of him. And the only reason I don't have 100 is I think that there's other builds that I just kind of try to mix and match with. But I like Joel Embiid an absolute ton. I want to prioritize him on DK 3,200 for Terrence Mann is an easy way to get that done. I would much rather be playing him. Kevin Huerter's there above him. He's actually getting more ownership for 1,100 more. I'd be close to just saying I'll take Terrence Mann straight up. So I get where the usage has been there to a certain extent there for, not Kevin Huerter. He's had 13.1, 12.0. You're just looking at an opportunity for a guy at 3,200. It's very difficult to imagine he's going to beat you there. And an 18.6% usage is just a nice number to see. I will say Huerter, in his defense, he went 0 for 7, 0 for 4 from 3 last game. And there's going to be a route, 27 minutes. He's going to probably play closer to that 30 number here. Again, we've got him in for 33.25, but I think Terrence Mann just beats him straight up. And so why wouldn't I be prioritizing him over Huerter?
Yeah. And Huerter, I think, is an interesting play because he has been running so bad and he's still, at a price tag that offers some value upside. And I think with the ownership right now being where it is, and the ownership, again, we're going to give away the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel. If you want to get them for every slate and know every guy's projected ownership, you have to do that with an Awesemo Plus membership. But we'll talk about it obviously on the show because it's going to be very relevant. Terrence Mann projected for 33% ownership on DraftKings today compared to 34% for Kevin Huerter. So both guys are going to be appropriately owned or, owned enough here where there's not a significant discount you're getting in terms of the ownership. So I am with you. I think I'd rather take the actual price discount, make it a little bit easier to afford. To me, Joel Embiid and Paul George is the priority duo. And I think that's the price tag that is a little bit tough to get to with both guys on the upswing with their DraftKings price tags. But I am with you fundamentally, though, that Kevin Huerter, you can get to, I'm not going to have any problem with, no objection with. But at this point, I would be willing to take the guys a little bit cheaper and steady amount of minutes. And honestly, for Huerter, Huerter is more likely to score 40 fantasy points, I'd say, by a wide margin. But at that point, at that same token, though, how likely is that to happen to this point based on the series we've seen? I feel like if anybody's going to bounce up more here, it's probably a Bogdan. It might even be a Lou Williams. It's probably a Gallo. I think there's a lot of guys who are going to, continue to have that upside a little more than Huerter moving forward.
Herter, last time he put up over 40, 46.25 against Indiana on, I believe it was April 18th. It's been a minute for the guy, and we're not even worried about it. That is the right question to ask, is what's the opportunity for him to actually do that? Because we're not necessarily hunting upside. What we're doing is we're trying to jam in the highest projected score. Like, it's not like everybody's going to have a little fire icon next to them over on DraftKings. So I do think Terrence Mann at 1,100 just makes it so easy. The only reason I don't have him lock buttoned again is that there's just certain builds and certain game stacks of that first one that I'm also trying to intertwine, because otherwise you just end up getting 4-5 Clippers in every single lineup on DraftKings. And I don't think that I necessarily want to be doing that every single lineup. I do want to kind of mix and match and try to force a little bit more of the early game in a couple of different lineups. But yeah, Terrence Mann, my favorite value piece on the slate, not close.
So the guys on Deeper Dive, Lofty and Greg, were talking right before us on the amount of Clippers they were getting. I think Greg was talking about having more willingness to get to 5. I don't think this is a spot where I want to get to 5 Clippers. I am letting my optimizer run to 4 Clippers, and I think that's enough here, because to me, there's a decent chance that one of these chalky plays, that includes Paul George again, Marcus Morris, Reggie Jackson, Nick Batum, Terrence Mann, there's a good chance that one of these guys underperforms, and that also you don't see a Luke Kennard or a Patrick Beverly, or somehow, by the grace of God, if Ivica Zubac plays this time after did not work out last time at all. I think there's a pathway here for these guys to get there, but even if, one of the top 5 guys doesn't get there, like as a Kennard, as a Beverly, as a Zubac, as a Rondo, like, are any of these guys going to have a meaningful upside to get you where you need to go? I'm not that confident in it. So I'm curious your thoughts on that one, Eric. Are you willing to play 5 Clippers, or are you like me trying to get close to the normal optimal, where I think some people usually limit to 4. I usually limit to 3 during the regular season, but for the playoffs, I've been a little more willing to go to 4.
I have a couple with 5, and I'll tell you why I'm going to actually defend our boy Greg here for a second about that. I think that you're just getting guys at 3,200 and 3K that kind of mix and match, and they don't need to go for 20. I'm not trying to get 20 out of Luke Kennard or Terrence Mann, but I mean, right now we have over 20 minutes for Luke Kennard, a guy who can knock down the open shots from outside in 3. Game 1 played 29 minutes, and that's with Kawhi on a floor. So, I mean, there's that. He's going to be playing. He played 20 minutes last game. I got to think he's going to play over 20 again here. Terrence Mann also 26 minutes. I think both of those two together, if they're your 2 guys that you're putting in that 5-man team, I really don't have a problem. The guys who cannibalize each other's shots, because the only thing that's ever shared in basketball is the assist to bucket. And so, like Paul George, Nicholas Batum, Marcus Morris, Reggie Jackson, I got to think that I don't want to get all 4 in every single lineup. I think there are lineup builds where you can play the 4, run it back with 2 guys on the Jazz and not have an issue. But I think more than likely some of these 5-mans that I do have, and I'm looking at my lineups right now, I have 40 lineups, and I've got 2 of them here right now that have 5-mans, and they both have Luke Kennard and Terrence Mann. And that's basically just a stand I'm making where it's like Luke Kennard at 3K can fit in, get 15, and possibly be optimal.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it too. And to be clear, I'm not going to begrudge anybody taking shots at the lower owned Clippers, though. Kennard at 20%, I think you're taking on some risk. And to me, the concern with Kennard is that I'm expecting Mike Conley to play. I feel like the wind's been blowing that way with the media reports on him, and that certainly can change here. But I'm expecting him to play, not actually be playable for DFS, at least based on the minutes projection we have him for at Awesemo today, where he's just shy of 25 minutes. We've seen guys come in, obviously James Harden being the most recent noteworthy example, playing over 45 minutes that first game back from his hamstring injury. But with Conley having more of a history of hamstring issues, I don't think they push him to that level. I think they're going to take what they can get out of him. That said, if he's out there for half the court time, like, it does make it easier to hunt a guy like Kevin Huerter, or not Kevin Huerter, excuse me, Luke Kennard. It does make it easy to hunt a guy like Kevin Huerter too. But like Luke Kennard is just not that great of a defender who's mostly there for the scoring. That's to me a kind of guy that I think is really volatile with the minutes, and people maybe not treating him like he's as volatile as he is. But 20% ownership on DK with the price tag, minimum salary, I certainly get it. But I think there's a lot of pathways for him to fail at that number, at least as many as there are for him to succeed at that number. Talk to me a little bit about Mike Conley, because I gave my take on that just now, and I'm curious to hear where you're landing with that one, because I don't see how he's playable. I also think he incredibly hurts Donovan Mitchell. And with a third of the field expected to be on Mitchell, I'd rather go to spots that I view as cleaner, which is, I think, there's some chance here the Clippers get rolled, I guess, and Paul George doesn't get there. But with what we saw last game, his usage just shy of 40%. I think it's a pretty good number. The rebounds were also there, and that's something that's been there all year long, where he comes up to a 12.4% rebound rate, court time without Kawhi Leonard. But Paul George, to me, much more of a priority. Joel Embiid, much more of a priority. So how are you handling the Jazz and Mitchell and Conley's existence together in particular?
I am so low on the Jazz. It's kind of ridiculous. I'm forcing my way to get to some of them. I'm not saying low on them to win. That's not absolutely where I'm going with this, but Mike Conley he cannibalizes so much of the production. It becomes such an issue to try to spike an upside for a lot of them. I think out of everybody on the floor, the one guy, and it makes me feel really sick to my stomach, but I feel like Rudy Gobert is very unaffected by Mike Conley's return. If anything, it's probably a benefit for him. We've seen him just fall off a cliff since Mike Conley went out game 2. We're looking at 29.5, 23, 34. They completely have nothing that they can do with this small ball lineup to incorporate Rudy Gobert in any kind of an offensive way. He's a little bit detracted. Just pulling him out from the hoop, it's a big deal. And on FanDuel, especially where blocks matter, and you're trying to just outpace Joel Embiid from a raw points projection. Capela's cheaper and allows you to get just a little bit more in your lineup. Gobert is kind of the guy that I'm forcing myself to get to just because he is going under. So if we had seen like a 45 spot from Gobert last time, he would be the easy de facto guy at 7,500 on DraftKings that would be plugged in there. And I think Conley being back helps him more than it helps just about anybody else on this team. And everybody else just basically gets cannibalized, as I was saying. Bojan Bogdanovic, very shooting dependent. Jordan Clarkson, extremely shooting dependent. I don't even know what those minutes are going to look like now, so long as you still get Donovan Mitchell playing. Like, it could be a very, very messy situation here. And so I'm kind of taking a short approach, basically because they're all priced as if Mike Conley's not there. Like, that's the way that I look at it. And now you put him into the lineup and you have such amazing value on one side. That's why I'm kind of forcing myself to get to a couple, but I'm just very low on them compared to the field.
So I'm actually with you on the take with Rudy Gobert, and I actually have a little more strong of a feeling for Bojan Bogdanovic, so I'll save that for a second. But Gobert is actually going to be the guy I'm most overexposed to on the slate, it looks like, based on the ownership. And I'm with you. Like, he played 40 minutes last game. It has been a bad scenario, and we've talked about this, where part of my hopes for him last game was if Zubac would start and then Gobert's minutes, not that they get more secure, but they're going to be more productive because having the big man out there is just easier for him to be by the rim, to both rim protect and get rebounds and get some easy shots at the rim. But when they go small, that makes it a little bit harder. But 40 minutes of Gobert, like, there's a lot of pathways for him to succeed. And that also includes ones where Clippers just miss a bunch of shots, and then Gobert just gets rebounds and tons of rebounds. We've seen that happen from time to time when teams have, faltered and fail in terms of their outcome. That's one way that that Gobert can sort of thrive from it. But to me, I think the price tag's too low. I think the minutes allotment's too nice to avoid. Today we have him projected for 37 minutes, but he played 40 last game. So to me, I think Gobert is one of the more underappreciated plays on the slate. And I am fully with you. And on FanDuel too, like, he's under 30% owned. I like Embiid a lot more, to be clear, but I think if Embiid doesn't quite get there, if he gets hurt, God forbid, or something else goes weird there, Gobert's the one who I think is the only viable center play afterwards.
Yeah. And God, first of all, I love that we're in lockstep on this, because I think we go back and forth. Sometimes we're in lockstep, sometimes we're not. It seems like my better nights come when we're in lockstep. So I'm happy.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Oh God, can't wait to be broke with you tonight. That'll be great. Good thing we can drink, not together because you hate me. But other than that, I really like getting to Gobert. And it's not even like Embiid could go for 57, Gobert could go for 37, and you still have paths to be optimal, because getting Paul George and Donovan Mitchell or some of these other top end guys, for me, it's Trae Young and Paul George, where it's just like, for me, and also Ben Simmons, another guy that I'm just way over the field on today. I think that those are kind of the stands that I have as well. I love Joel Embiid over on DraftKings, but on FanDuel specifically, Gobert, I'm just making a larger stand on it. I'm able to spread my exposure out. DK, I'm just more worried about getting all the raw points together. You don't have to worry about it. But FanDuel, you kind of have to make a stand at the center position. You only have 3 really, unless you want to punt and hope Howard goes for 25 and somehow works himself out to be optimal, or Derek Favors ends up playing 18 minutes because of crazy foul trouble for Gobert. Those are really your 2 paths where you're trying to get different and you can spend up at other spots. But just from a projection standpoint, I think Gobert is the guy that I'm just talked myself into in the last couple hours as I was going through the deep dive, which I wrote today. I was just kind of feeling like Rudy Gobert is going to be the guy.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And it's also, it's an elimination game for Utah. Like, that's another big part of it, where everybody's going to play more minutes. Obviously, Mitchell and Conley. And I think we need to talk more about the injury status, because people in the chat, I saw Tariq was talking in the chat about how he thinks both those guys are out. This is not the regular season. This is the end of the season. This is their last shot to stay in the playoffs or go home. So Mike Conley forcing himself back, like, I think he's doing that much like James Harden did, because obviously Harden wasn't an elimination game, but it was a spot where, like, if they lose one more game there, that series is over if Harden's not out there and Kyrie also can't get out there, which seems like that's going to continue to be the case. In this spot, to me, like the Jazz need the win. Obviously, they always need to win, but in today in particular, like if you're ever going to play Rudy Gobert 44 minutes, today is the day. If you're ever going to play Mitchell with his ankle being busted up, like if he's going to play 40 minutes, like I think that's a possibility. And I think there's another thing to point out, Eric, that I don't see any way in the world Mitchell doesn't play. I know he's a game time decision, but like we know who he is as a man at this point. We know who he is as a player, the guy who wants to be out there. I'm saying we know who he is
as a man. Oh man, I don't know who he is as a man, dude.
He's a spider. He's a spider as a man. I think that's the main thing we know. Some could say a Spider-Man even perhaps. But overall, no, he's a dude. He's a gamer. He's a guy who wants to be out there. He cares a lot about it. He wears it on his sleeve. And this spot to me, like there's no chance he doesn't play. If he's ineffective again, I think that's something you could point to. And he was ineffective last game. The usage rate came down as a result. But with Conley out there, I think it defrays attention enough where I think they can't dedicate quite as much to stopping Mitchell. And that's the thing to me, like I'm scared of not having as much of him as I did in previous days. I'll have him under 5% today, but the point is I think he's going to be out there. So I wouldn't go like, hey, let me play a bunch of Jordan Clarkson because Mitchell's going to be limited and Conley's also limited. Those guys just being on the court, I think is enough to sort of inhibit everything.
Yeah. 100% agree. I'm sorry. I just got so distracted that I went on a tangent in my brain. God.
You were thinking about Spider-Man. I got it.
I was. Well, not just Spider-Man. It's just knowing him as a man. It just, that's a great way of looking at it. I don't know. You're poetic sometimes. What can I say? It's a beautiful thing to be.
Our guy Sofa is. I'm also saying that our pal Josh Engelman would be disgusted by the amount of likes in here. And look, I don't share that. I think part of the issue is guys like Eric and myself, Greg and Laffy. We don't care about likes. We have enough validation. Laffy's got a beautiful family. Eric has a beautiful fiance. I have a lovely girlfriend. I've had some great wins recently. And Greg's got Twitter. Greg's got Twitter going for him. So we all have stuff here. Josh doesn't have anything besides likes. So when we don't ask for likes a bunch like Josh does, just hit the like button anyway, because that's just us being nice to you, not distracting from the content. And Greg's got Twitter. So that's the main thing to keep in mind for everybody out there. But
honestly, that's the greatest thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
Hit that like button, guys, if you can, because we appreciate it a bunch and we don't want to have to worry about it here. Just smash that like button. Give us some love. The rest of the Jazz. So Bojan Bogdanovic, I think, is the next conversation point. And Greg, I thought did make a really good point. Maybe when he saw on Twitter on the last show about Bojan Bogdanovic, where if he misses 2 more 3-pointers, that game is not going to be remembered as fondly, might not even be a tournament winner. And I do agree with that take. The issue for me with Bojan is he's in for 37 minutes from Awesemo today. And there's volatility there for sure. But I think there's more of a floor than people will give credit for. And I would personally prefer to go to Marcus Morris, prefer to go to Nick Batum a little bit more. But you do have one more forward spot on DK to get to. And to me, Bojan Bogdanovic is that guy that I can get to at some volume. Price tag a little more appealing to some of the other guys. I know we've debated John Collins recently, Eric, but to me, I think Bojan just getting the minutes and being in the mix and also having one more distributor out there in Conley who's going to be limited. I think there's upside for Bojan still. And I don't think it's a points chase as much as it is, hey, it's an elimination game. The guy's going to be here and he can very well put up 17 3-pointers again. And even if he hits, 5 to 10, like what if he hits 14? Like that's not a likely outcome, but that's a lot of 3-pointers, man.
A lot of threes. Well, I mean, Bojan started off the game knocking down a zillion threes in a row. And as you said, like it's just a spot where we kind of pick our spots. And as I said, you can play everybody. You're probably going to be playing a little bit of everybody, except for I'm not going to play Lou Williams. It's just a stand that I have at this point in time, but you're going to mix and match. And so being aware of recency bias on both directions. And, maybe Kevin Huerter's the guy that you can basically plug and be like, oh, he'll have some shooting regression back towards the mean in a positive way. And then you have a guy like Bojan Bogdanovic have it regress back towards the mean in a negative way. And so we're just trying to piece together exactly what that needs to look like. And I'm just making some strong stands. You're doing the same thing. And we just kind of move along. And Street Preacher, I know I'm back on track here. How about that? I'm back.
Also, people pointing out that Josh does in fact have a wife. Look, if I mentioned that too, it would have completely ruined the narrative angle I went for here to not have to work for likes. But he does have a lovely wife who, in fact, takes care of him, really treats him like a sugar baby in a lot of ways. That's what
I am unaware of such things, but now I know.
Josh of Los Angeles, another Josh saying John Stockton for no reason in particular. I don't know why he's saying that, but I enjoy John Stockton. Here's one thing I did yesterday, and
John Stockton. It's the words. That's all.
We have enough time to go on some tangents here, as you might guess. But one thing I did recently, and I'd be curious to do this for John Stockton. I looked up Pedro Martinez's rates because we talked about him on a show recently for MLB, and just how he would compare to a Jacob deGrom and all that. And the numbers were even better than I realized. He had like a 1% on run rate. I'm wondering what John Stockton is historically. Like, is he like a 50% assist rate guy? Is he like, or is he like 10% usage? Like, is he TJ McConnell through the lens of like just the pure stats?
Or just TJ McConnell with 42 minutes a game, something like that.
And send more elbows to people's crotches, I think.
Oh, yeah. So that's the fun story. So a long time ago, I got to watch Mike Krzyzewski talk. I dated a girl from Durham or whatever. I can't remember the time that I was at Durham, but I watched Mike Krzyzewski talk. And somebody asked him, who's the dirtiest player that you've ever coached? And he said in like 2.2 seconds, John Stockton, like immediately. It was like John Stockton was like the guy that he said, and everybody laughed because you don't think of John Stockton being dirty. Maybe I just didn't because I watched him play when I was 7, basically. But apparently that's the guy you didn't want to screw with in the NBA. That little skinny, measly little thing. 50.2 assist percentage for a career for John Stockton. How you doing?
Oh, I guess people. So I didn't know that was why the super chat was sent in, but people saying you have to be really offline to not know about John Stockton, who I guess is in a documentary about COVID conspiracies. To be clear, I've been more in the Cole Beasley world today, which is really, I think, a more fun street to be on personally. But I didn't know that would justify a super chat in. But either way, we appreciate it from Josh Los Angeles anyway. And
love it.
Josh Los Angeles apparently hates Malone as well, which I guess I would get if he is a Los Angeles Lakers fan. That's certainly a viable man to hate, given that run there.
Malone's had an interesting life.
All right, so let's do money time right now. Then we'll jump back around. We also Trae Young officially playing. Shocker there. Again, another guy. These are very important games. So everybody who is going to be remotely able to play will play. Let me refresh ownership. I'll flip the hat because it is in fact money time. Last ownership run we got 36 minutes ago, but still should reflect everything that's going on in the slate. Nothing's changed since then. And hit that like button first because we appreciate that a bunch here. Again, we're not asking for it a lot, but help us out. Do that. Paul George, number 1 projected own play according to our Awesemo projections today, which you can always get for yourself at awesemo.com/join and use that promo code NBA live before lock. Get 25% off your first week. Paul George, number 1 projected at 48% on DraftKings. Number 2, Nick Batum at 45%. Number 3, Marcus Morris, slightly lower version of 45%. Number 4, Joel Embiid, 41% expected ownership. And number 5, Reggie Jackson, 40% expected ownership. And Eric, when you hear those names, I will say all these guys, I'm going to be there right with the field, if not above it on a few of them. So anything give you some pause here when you hear George, Batum, Morris, Embiid, and Reggie Jackson on DraftKings?
No, all I hear is 4 of the 5 are Clippers, and they should be. So that's kind of correct. DraftKings just didn't price them up correctly. And Fanduel tried, but they didn't do enough. And that's kind of where we're at on this slate. But it's a ton of production to go around without Kawhi there. And it makes complete sense that if you're only going to get a price bump on Nicholas Batum from 4,600 to 4,900, I believe is now the number for Paul George. He took the biggest hop. Obviously, he went up 1,500, but that's still not enough. He's going to project well into 55, 56 territory. Marcus Morris goes from 4,500 to 5,100. Reggie Jackson goes from 5,100 to 5,200. Like, what are you even doing putting up Reggie Jackson 100? Like, just don't even do it at that point. Like, you're not helping us at all whatsoever.
The nice usage mark on Reggie Jackson too. Definitely a play for me. Yeah.
So let's talk about that. So out of the 4 of the 5, if you had to make a stand, now this would be the interesting one. And maybe this is something to think about. Cause let's say that you have some lineups, the Atlanta game, let's say Joel Embiid gets hurt or God forbid something bad happens. Which one of the guys on the Clippers would you be the most inclined to jump ship on out of those 4?
Oh, you mean like who would I pivot off of if like
who would you pivot off of?
I think
my answer makes me uncomfortable.
I'm curious your answer first then.
Paul George. I would just jump ship on Paul George. I think purely because I could spread that around to other people. I think that it's going to be so easy for Nicholas Batum, Marcus Morris, and I get it from a raw points perspective, but at least I can maybe spread it around to Donovan Mitchell, Gobert. I'm not going to play Mike Conley. I don't think I can play Mike Conley at all today. There's too many question marks. I think you'll get announced as starting. People might try to get there a little bit, but I just have so many question marks about it where I think I'm too uncomfortable. He's too expensive for what that role is probably going to look like, in my opinion. He'd have to get up over 30 minutes for me to really find him viable. But I think I would probably just jump ship on Paul George and try to spread it out elsewhere.
I think that's an interesting way to look at it. And I mean, based on the numbers too, like, because you can then get down to Mitchell and at least salvage that a little bit. And even if Mitchell's not going to be quite as good because of his injury and having Conley back in, like, it's hard to see him not getting 40 fantasy points. And there is a world here where Paul George just gets double and triple teamed and it's on everybody else to beat him. So I'm with you on that take. I think obviously that's an outcome none of us want to see. And right now I am still playing Paul George very heavy. But I would agree, if things go very poorly in the first game, Paul George is probably the most pivotal one. And going to guys like Reggie, Marcus Morris, Batum, and even, the Kennards of the world, I think that's something you could do. And then, save money on those guys and go to Mitchell. That's definitely a pathway that's there. If for some reason you are running really bad after the first game, let's do the FanDuel top 5 owned plays. And this is an interesting one. Number 1 here on FanDuel, Tobias Harris, number 1, 67% owned on FanDuel. Number 2, Nick Batum, 54%. Number 3, Bojan Bogdanovic at 47%. Number 4, Ben Simmons, 47%. And number 5, Danilo Gallinari at 47%. And it's interesting looking at the FanDuel slate, Eric, because it seems like there's just more risk here for the top 5 with Ben Simmons. Everybody hates him on social media now because he had one bad game and certainly stopped shooting in that game too, in a way that classic Ben Simmons. Tobias Harris, also tough shooting day last time out. Definitely can get gobbled up on days where Seth Curry goes for 750 points in one day. But I think, to me, Tobias at 67%, I think he has a bounce back day, but that's a lot of Tobias Harris ownership.
But it's justified. So if you look at the position, there's 4 people. I'm not playing anybody
John
else.
Collins, that's why.
Yeah, so John Collins is $300 more now, and I do hate John Collins. You're correct. He's only lost me money because somehow out of the middle of nowhere, after not having double-digit rebounds for a month and a half, basically, it hadn't been since May 1st. I brought it up on the show, and since then I talked him into just being a god, apparently. So 14 and 12, 19 and 11. And that's alongside a guy like Capela, who just chops into his rebound rate so much. Capela's played 35 and 38 minutes the last 2 games. He's been solely focused on playing defense and on Embiid. Not well, but that's what he's been solely focused on. And they've won games, so you can't really knock it too much. But John Collins has definitely been the offensive and the rebounding beneficiary that I never thought he really could be in this spot. We didn't really see any potential for it in that entire Knicks series, given they were playing slow and pace, different matchup. Philadelphia, the first 4 games, he just basically was the same thing. And then you saw he was going to be 50% owned for game 5. And game 4, it was that he was going to be 50% owned. And I understood at 5,900, it made sense why people were going there. And now obviously that thing's gone up. And on FanDuel specifically, he's 7,500 now. That makes it so easy for me to cut bait. And I think Tobias Harris just had about the worst game you possibly could. He's just had an abysmal series in general, but 26% usage is going to be kind of what you're projecting him for. It's been so bad the last 2, 19.6, 15.4. I think that gets back up here at some point. We got to think that he's going to be projecting out for more than 30. I think he beats John Collins straight up. And therefore, when you're going to get 300 less, I see why that ownership is going to Harris.
Okay, I wouldn't mind spreading a little more ownership John Collins' way on FanDuel, though I agree the price tag is a little bit gaudy and certainly reflects some of the recent games he's had. And I would agree, like John Collins, to me, I'll be half the field or a little bit more than that on Draftkings today. So I am on the same page with you overall, but I just, see that much Tobias Harris, and I just think there's a pathway here, especially because I am forcing my way to Joel Embiid a lot on Draftkings, that I would certainly prefer to, get a little bit less Tobias Harris than that. But I think you can go to Morris and John Collins as the pivot play at power forward, and I would have no issue with it, but I get it a little bit. Let's do the FanDuel, the Yahoo top 5 as well, because of course they are a sponsor today, and they do have the $20 in YSRPs you can get if you use the promo code Awesemo20 over there today. If you deposit $5, it doesn't matter if you're a new sign up at Yahoo or a person who's already got an account over there. If you're depositing $5, we'll give you $20 in YSRPs with the promo code Awesemo20. So there's really no downside to go over there. You're basically getting $15 free to play with and hopefully win some money with over at Yahoo. So go check that out. Top 5 on Yahoo. Number 1 is going to be Paul George at 58%. Number 2, Joel Embiid at 50%. Number 3, Nick Batum at 49%. Number 4, Reggie Jackson at 44%. And number 5, Kevin Huerter at 43.4%. And that's the one I know you're saving money is $11 on Yahoo, but we talked enough about him, but there's a lot of variability there that I wouldn't mind just getting to 20% Huerter and trying to spread that around and take some other value plays, like find a $6 and get some Marcus Morris or something.
Yeah, the thing is that small forward is Bojan Bogdanovic, Joe Ingles, Kevin Huerter. Like, that's your small forward position. I think Thibault is down there at $10 as well. So I'd either be zeroing it out with Thibault or, Ingles is just going to look abysmal today at 16. Going to be tough to get where you want to with that. You're fading the Bogdanovic. I think that's what I'm going to be doing is fading the Bojan Bogdanovic at small forward, but it is such a crusty, bad little position. So I think that's why you're seeing that ownership so meaningful there. He's $11. He's definitely probably the most comfortable of that grouping. I just am building a lineup here right now on Yahoo, and I'm going to be going the Thibault route just to get a little bit different. Make sure that I zero it out that direction so that it doesn't have a direct swap back and forth. Maybe I can leave $1 here, and just if it's going to be Thibault versus Herter, that's not the best situation to be in, but I think that it's one that you kind of have to win at that kind of ownership in order to like have a solo ship here.
And I wouldn't hate Korkmaz $10 too on Yahoo, 16% owned. Like there are definitely pivot plays you can make to Herter and, you know, chop that ownership down a little bit if you are playing a bunch of lineups on Yahoo or even just one. I think going Thibault's a good one. I agree. Mm-hmm. I feel like I've heard Thibault, and I in my heart I want to say Thibault, but sometimes I go Thibault, and I don't know. I just feel uncomfortable not knowing for sure how to go with that one. Korkmaz though, Thibault, I would say the two that really jump out, and Luke Kennard at $10 as well.
Spags, pick a lane.
I know. I'm a coward. I gotta stand.
All right. It's like me with everybody. It's fine.
Joel Embiid confirmed to be playing. Shocker there that he will be playing in the elimination game, but he's in fact in. So let's talk about him. So one issue I'm having, and this is something I've really tried not to do, because part of the reason that I had my one good win a couple weeks ago is I didn't tinker too much, just kind of let it ride, trust the data, went with that process. Joel Embiid in my sorting process was not coming up enough. I was getting him around 20% rather than where I want to be, which is around 50%. The field projected to be at 41% on DraftKings, as we talked about, 36 on Fanduel, where that mark is falling right now. But to me, Embiid, I don't know how you wouldn't have him in half your lineups. I also think the ownership has had sort of a tough time accounting for the human narrative during the playoffs, where I think Embiid's going to be 60% owned today, and I think people will force their way to get there. I don't know if you have a feel about this one, but Joel Embiid, to me, I think one of the most secure plays on the slate, even with the price tag coming up, who still has tournament upside. I find it hard to believe he doesn't get you 55 today, and that to me is enough at center where I can do some different things, but I'm willing to get there a lot. How are you handling Joel Embiid with 40% ownership going his way on DraftKings and 36 on FanDuel?
So with the last month with Danny Green off the floor, 40% usage for Joel Embiid, like, come on, it's a great play. The only question becomes is, like, how do you decide? So for me, my leverage and my ability is by playing multiple sites. So I'm playing Yahoo, I'm playing FanDuel, I'm playing DraftKings. I have the ability to kind of mix and match players, so I'm not left high and dry in certain spots, and I can have a little bit of play, a little bit in play on every single person, every single one of these studs, and not feel completely like I'm a coward who's not making a stand on anything here at this point in time. More just making a good decision to spread out my equity. But I like getting to Joel Embiid a lot on DraftKings. I think on FanDuel, I'm just making the stand that he just goes out, doesn't knock down some of these fadeaway 10-footers, 12-footers that it just seems like he's hit repeatedly the last couple games. Not in game 4 it was, but in game 5, just went completely bonkers. He was hitting a lot of ridiculous shots. I'm going to say that. Capela is a pretty decent little defender, even though he got 60 spots put up on him on FanDuel for those first 3 games. So FanDuel specifically, I'm forcing builds of just Gobert Capela. That's a big stand that I'm making over there, and I'm getting a little bit lighter on Embiid. But because of the raw points that exist there on DraftKings, you've got to force yourself into a little bit. It's just wrong not to in this spot. If I'm making one lineup, that's a spot where I think the comfortable thing is to play Joel Embiid. I would probably be directing myself to go Gobert Capela and kind of combine the two forces there, or just playing one of John Collins in that other spot as well instead of Capela, where you can play him at power forward center. But yeah, as in terms of raw points, it's Paul George and it's him. And Paul George, I already project for more. So I'm just jamming him a bunch on every single site, not worried about that. But Trae Young, the guy, just because he's a little bit cheaper, allows me to also play some Bojan Bogdanovic in some spots. I keep saying the opposite one that I'm thinking, which is just annoying. But the Atlanta Hawks dude, how about
Bogdan.
That Bogdan. Thank you. Bogdanovic. I enjoy him. I'm going to be forcing a lot of him as well, just because I think the field, if we had seen 28 minutes, 30 minutes out of him there's a massive upside. His price tag went down a little bit more on FanDuel as well. That's kind of the big stand that I'm making at that position, is just being massively overweight to Paul George and Bogdanovic and letting the field spread out their equity everywhere else.
Yep, I'm on the same page with you here. And I think one play that I'm actually going to be curious where you land with, because I don't love the FanDuel ownership for this guy, but I do think on DraftKings, I'm going to have a quarter of my lineups with him, and that feels like a decent amount. Ben Simmons. So I don't know what to make of him, honestly. And he's one of these guys that I've played a little bit more of than people during the season. There've been also, when he had the 45 fantasy point game during the series, I had muted him that day. I mentioned it. Adam Shipped My Money had talked about the rebound rates being down. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to be this heavy on Ben Simmons. Everybody hates him. He's not going to be that owned. It wasn't worth it. He paid it off that day. Say the ownership's coming down. The price tag is kind of ugly on DraftKings. I think it's ugly on FanDuel too, honestly, but still, it makes a little more sense how you get there. But I'm going to play him in the quarter of lineups, and I think that's under the ownership projection right now, but I don't have the confidence that the field's actually going to be there 30% of the time because people love spinning Ben Simmons sucks narratives. And to me, he's just as likely to have a terrible day as he is to have that outlier day where he gets, the mediocre man's triple-double, the 11-10-10 triple-double or whatever it is. But I feel like to me, Simmons is a play that I wouldn't rule out of a player pool, and I'd certainly want to get in some portion of lineup. So how are you approaching him today? And tell me if it's different as well on DraftKings versus FanDuel.
No, so people are building lineups the same way that Stephen A. Smith talks sports. Like it's the same kind of thing where it's just hot takes and you want to build and do the thing because Ben Simmons sucks now. Ben Simmons doesn't suck. He has triple-double upside every time he touches a floor. I'm about at the field, and that's one that I'm just not comfortable being under the field. So if it's not 30%, I'm going to be over the field, and I'm fine with that at this point in time. I know that number on DraftKings didn't change as much as what you would want, but that's where he has the triple-double upside. 7,800 as he moves a little bit closer at point guard to Reggie Jackson. They're now within 2,300 of each other as opposed to last game where that was not the case. And Ben Simmons, 8,500, he got that price cut. In my main lineup over on FanDuel, I do have Ben Simmons in it right now. It's just set up a little bit different. As I said, Paul George, Bogdanovic, you can kind of fill out the rest of it from there, especially because I'm not going to play Embiid in that one specifically, but I do not mind Ben Simmons in any way, shape, or form. Plus, people talk about these free throws being a bad thing. It's a great thing for his fantasy production. And I don't understand why people can't see that because the game stops. The game literally frickin' stops. And he gets to shoot free throws. And even if he's only making 1 out of 2, he's going to shoot 15 of them in this spot. That's like a free 5 to 7 points on top of his projection. So I hope they hack a Ben Simmons if I roster him. I don't understand that reasoning.
Yeah, I agree. You just got to hope he runs good and that he's shooting closer in line to season average, which is still not good, but better than what he's done at some of these spots where he's completely wilted. And actually, here's a prop I'm curious your thoughts on. It doesn't have the win percentage on it on Awesemo right now, so I don't have that frame of reference, but I do have him projected a little bit towards the over. 28.5 points plus rebounds and assists. And actually, the line at some books is at 29.5. So to me, if you can get it on some of these books, looks like BetMGM and PointsBet have it at 28.5, and then some of the other ones have it at 29.5. But in this spot, to me, the fact that there are some books that have a little bit over it, I do like, but I think over 28.5, I'd have him a little bit over 30 for myself. It's not the biggest margin here. It's certainly not like a 90% win rate like we talk about sometimes with no house advantage. Mm-hmm. But I do think with Simmons, I like the overs here. And I just certainly in DFS, you're getting a little more leverage on the field and taking that narrative. But I think there's a bit of a discount in his lines too, just because everybody hates Ben Simmons, which is not as fun of a TV show as some of the other ones with similar names.
I like the under 42.5 for Donovan Mitchell too. That's the other one that I was looking at. If you're going to do the combinations of points plus rebounds plus assists, Mike Conley just jumps in. He's going to affect everything that goes on in that offense. Even if he only plays 26 minutes, maybe that doesn't make him DFS viable for us, but it certainly makes him sportsbook viable. Definitely makes him a guy that I want to be shorting some of these Jazz guys, especially because outside of Rudy Gobert, I think there's just such a path that these numbers are inflated a little bit more. Now, some of the numbers have been baked in now because we saw that number more around 45. I believe it was the last game, 44.5. I can't remember. I had a small number on it, so I kind of forgot I could go back and look. But now that it's down to 42.5, I still like the under on that. That's available over at OddsShopper, taking a look around there. So definitely take advantage of that as well.
Also seems like YouTube chat disagreeing or maybe confused by your take with free throws. And I am on your side for that one. So I guess I'll try to make the defense here. Okay. Street Preacher saying Lindquist missing free throws is a good thing, is the best take this channel's ever heard. And then they're saying, I think that was an ironic one by Street Preacher. But the point is the clock stops and he's getting free throws. And if he somehow hits 4 of 4 early on, he's going to feel emboldened to take more. You guys are playing the other side of the coin. But the point is it's a variability spot that you could target when people are buying, oh, he's just going to miss him and he's going to ruin everything. That's sort of the point here. And I don't want to misspeak here for what you're viewing it, Eric, but feel free to rebut the points there a little bit.
Okay, so we just look at it this way. So if he shoots 50% from the line or 40%, how about we say that he makes 6 of 15 free throws? Well, for a guy who's been shooting, 5 free throws, 6 free throws a game up until that point in time, if they're going to go hack a Ben Simmons, I know that the game before it, I think he shot 4 or 5 free throws, but I'm just talking off the cuff right now. I just know for a fact that if you're going to get a free 6 points where 1, the clock stops. 2, I know he can't gain assists, but there are rebounds that you can still get on the defensive end. There's assists that he can create for other people throughout the game. The clock stops. The clock stops. The clock stops. That is the thing. That's the reason that when you look at first and second half spreads at sports books, the second half is always inflated because fouling occurs at the end of game for free throws to get made. And there are more points generally scored in the second half than there are in the first half. So it's the same way that I'm going to look at Ben Simmons, where if I'm going to be projecting him, if we just say that he's going to shoot his normal allotment of free throws, I'm going to project him for around 36, but I'm going to jump that projection to around 40 in the event that he's going to shoot double-digit free throws, because when the clock stops, it doesn't affect anything else other than the fact that he has an opportunity to make just one of two free throws in those spots. And that can just add so much fantasy value. And on a 2-game slate, that can be the difference between something being optimal and not optimal.
Yeah, and then Robert's saying it's opportunity cost for other statistical categories for not only Ben, but other players in those minutes. They're technically, that is a possession that gets killed, but the clock is stopping. So that's the main thing, especially like, granted, if it's Simmons running down the clock for 24 seconds and then he gets fouled and then misses 2 free throws, like, yeah, it's not ideal. But the point, though, is really about the impact on Ben Simmons. Like, you can't start worrying about correlation of Ben Simmons to what Joel Embiid's doing. Like, Ben Simmons sucked last game, and then Joel Embiid had the best game of the series. So I don't know. I think
how much is an assist and a rebound worth? It's just a little over 1. He's getting free opportunities with a stopped clock to get 1 of 2. So it's a math problem that you're not going to win against me. Like, I'm right and you're wrong. Sorry about it.
And I think too, the point is really that it is going to be the best for Ben Simmons. And that's the way you could look at it. Like, there's still, I can say with some faith, especially against Atlanta with a 223 combined total here in this game, there's gonna be more than enough possessions to go around. I think if you're worrying about Ben Simmons free throws and you're somehow getting less Embiid, or like, I don't like Tobias Harris, you're getting less Harris, you're getting all less of these guys, I don't think you're looking at it the right way, but obviously people are entitled to their opinion. I just think there's a little bit of a logic gap there.
I'm not saying I'm playing 100% Ben Simmons or even 50% Simmons. I'm just saying you should have him in your player pool, because I think his projection's even a little bit better than what we had him in for earlier. And part of that just has to do with stopped clock free throws. And if they're going to hack him, if they're going to bring in guys like Snell or Solomon Hill or somebody to foul him in end of game scenarios in the fourth quarter to try to get it back if they're down a couple, like, there's an upside for Ben Simmons to go out and make a ton of free throws.
Robert, it says, I'm a master's in math. I don't know that I'm going to necessarily trust everybody's YouTube credentials, but if you want to write up a white paper for it, I promise you I'll review it, because that's the kind of person I am. Just DM me at Chris Spags. If you have a white paper on Ben Simmons free throws and give me the full back point of it, I will come on the stream and flog Eric Lindquist as hard as I can. But it's more
Jenkins says Lindquist explains basketball like a high school girl explains boy problems.
I was going to say, I did have a little laugh at that one. But
that was actually hilarious. Here's the thing. People don't understand. Most people, I think, who have seen these shows know that I'm more than happy to make fun of myself. That is hilarious.
Yes, you are, and I appreciate
that. Is said for my life. Hilarious. Oh, that was your cat. I thought you were grabbing your puppet.
No, the puppet's over there.
Thank God. I saw we had our boy El Negro Loco in the chat there, and I was like, oh no, he's about to lose his mind here in 3 seconds. But no, it was a kitty.
Let's talk about the rest of the Clippers. And one guy that we haven't hit on that, to me, I am surprised to see at just 25% ownership. And I don't think he's unplayable, but Seth Curry, having, again, the best game that this man might ever have in his life. And maybe it's a turning point for him where he actually becomes his brother, or a viable pivot point to it, what his brother does. But this game today, like, I have him for 26.8 fantasy points. I think he's a solid play. That said, I don't buy that he's only going to be 25% owned. When people see that last game, I'll be under the field on the 25% number. And to me, I think he gets closer to 35, 40 on DK. But how are you feeling about Seth Curry, and how are you approaching him? Because I just don't think he's a bad play, but I do think that even though a lot of people out there, especially people in the chat, will recognize like that is an outlier game, I think they'll see the opportunity and go like, oh, he's got to be in the mix. And I think he has to be in the mix, but I don't think he's going to be worth whatever the field's going to think he's worth.
Yeah, I'm less than half the field. So he's at 25% on DK. I have 10% over there. Over on FanDuel, I'm getting like 0 because I'm playing Bogdanovic and George. It's such a outrageous clip over there, and just making that my stand. But I get it. He's a guy with a lot of upside who just got done scoring 51 points there. He's had a couple of games where he's gone out and shot just the ball phenomenally well. Also against Washington in that game 4, he had a 30% usage. He can spike these usages when he gets hot. The problem is I don't see him taking 19 field goal attempts again. We saw 10, 10, 13, 12. We did see 17 in that last game 4 again against Washington, but that's what happens. He's a guy who gets streaky and they feed him the ball. But in some of these other spots, I think you're basically overpaying at 5,400 for him. I would rather try to get a little bit different at 25% of him.
Also, shout out for Marshall White saying, I come for the puppet, but I leave with DFS info all the time. What the fuck? Look, that's how it goes. That Puppet Lindquist puts butt in the seats, but that's the thing is that he knows that you got to pick your spots better. You can't be showing up on every show. You just got to come in like a wildfire and then leave again. Let's see. We got some questions here. But people asking about Korkmaz. I think Korkmaz is a fine value play, and to me, not quite as much of a priority as a guy like Terrence Mann. And I also got, actually, let me make sure the exposure I had to Korkmaz. Yeah, I'm under 20% on Korkmaz, so I'll be under the field. I still think he's a fine play. I think too, if you're not playing Seth Curry, to be Korkmaz getting a little more production as well as Tobias Harris. That's a more obvious one, but Korkmaz getting a little more production when Seth Curry doesn't shoot the lights out like he did last game out, to me is a logical pivot play, but not a priority play for me, Eric. And I feel like Korkmaz is fine. And to me, he just looks appropriately on 27% on DK, 14% on Fanduel. I think on Yahoo, that's really the one that I'd point to as being like, maybe it's a little better on there.
How bad has Doc Rivers been coaching basketball games in this series? Like it's a little shocking to me. So Korkmaz is going to be just fine here. But for me, the shocking part is like Thibault, when you're already massively up there in the third quarter, they started Korkmaz, and that it started to feed in a little bit to Atlanta gaining some momentum there. I know that it was like, it was later into the third quarter. It was basically Korkmaz got off the floor. They brought in Thibault, George Hill, Shake Milton, Dwight Howard, Tyrese Maxey. Why do you possibly, and then they had Tobias Harris as the only dude who was on the floor there at the beginning of the fourth quarter when he was in the middle of the worst game of his life. So that made no sense to me. This is my long-winded way of saying that there are other guys that you can take shots on, but I do think that Matisse Thybulle has to be your direct pivot. It's not necessarily Seth Curry, and I could see why you would say Korkmaz being the guy there, but if I'm going to be less on Korkmaz, if I'm going to be under the field there, I think you got to be over on Thybulle. I would have to think that that's a positive game script there and the same way you look at football, like you're looking at a positive game script there for Matisse Thybulle. I would think that they would bring him a little bit earlier into that third quarter to be able to just start shutting dudes down rather than have Korkmaz out there. But that's just me. And yeah, again, Korkmaz can get lit. He knocked down a couple of shots. He had a pretty good start to that game in game one and came out of the gate hot. Didn't necessarily do anything in that little stint he did in the fourth quarter, but over 24 minutes of anybody you're going to have exposure to on this slate outside of Mike Conley because he's just too expensive.
Yeah, and I'm going to be at 30% Thibault too, so I'm actually on the same page with you as well.
Okay.
I think.
Are you honestly playing them together in lineups anywhere?
I don't. I don't have an easy way to reference that real fast. I didn't make a rule for it, but I presume it's possible, but it's unlikely based on the way the construction's going because I'm getting Paul George in like every lineup, Morris in like every lineup, Reggie in like every lineup. So I don't think it happened a lot, but I wouldn't necessarily be opposed. If you're getting that in everyone, I might make the rule of only one of Korkmaz or Thibault, but I think the way that Thibault gets there is Philly's up, Atlanta's not having great success early, and they just keep Thibault out there and let him do what he does in the hopes they can oppress them better and not blow a lead and not screw it up like last game. So I'm with you. I think there's a pathway for Thibault, and the price tag too is appealing. And as the fact that Thibault does get like shots up every game, he's not a high usage guy by any stretch, but they always see like, hey, is this a game where Thibault can shoot? And they'll give him one or two or give him a shot at a dunk. And then when he inevitably misses it, then they go away from him. But I think if he ever runs hot, he's actually going to get minutes, I think.
Yeah, and I think on Yahoo, on our sponsor today, I think Korkmaz at $10 is a phenomenal play to be plugging in there. I think on that one specifically, the one lineup that I'm rolling out here in the 20, and then I've got a couple in the smaller stuff just because, wanting to give them some love and get comfortable playing over there a little bit. I'm trying, hanging on over there. And also they've treated us very well here. So Korkmaz, though, $10 and Thibault $10. I think that becomes a build that works out really well, especially if I'm going to play Terrence Mann at 10. That allows me to play Young, George, and Embiid together. That's kind of where it's more optimal for me to be doing it. But on DraftKings, I think I would have a rule. I don't have enough of Korkmaz. Like, I'm not going completely nuts there. And they have a tiny bit of overlap. But if I were making 150 lineups today instead of 40, I would definitely do something where I reduce the projection so they didn't end up together in a bunch of lineups, because I think they are a little bit negatively correlated.
Anybody also, I was going to say that we need to get likes. We had 419 likes and I just wanted to get to 420. Now we're at 421. So now I don't know what I want in life. I feel like it'd be nice to get to 500, I guess, now that we're past the 420, but either way, anybody that we haven't talked about at all, because we got about 3 minutes left to lock, probably less by the time you guys hear that, probably closer to 2. So start getting those lineups in. Anybody that we haven't hit on that you want to make sure to prioritize, that you mentioned them here, you said, hey, this guy's important, because I think we've covered basically everybody, but is there anybody you want to give that final cosign to?
I think Lou Kennard. I mean, he's 21% now on DK, so maybe not anymore. Earlier in the day, he was a little bit lower. I was kind of making a stand on him. I'm still going to have about at the field, which makes me feel just ridiculous. But I really think that roster construction is such an important part about what you're doing today, more so than just the plays themselves. Trying to find ways to not just be. We've had so many slates where things have worked out basically optimal, and we're seeing 150 way split, and those are never going to be great days for me because I try to leave table. I try to find ways to be unique. I think that that's such an important part of playing 2-game slates long-term. And it is nice to have those hits. And I'm so happy when people send screenshots, where it's 150 train and they're winning, but those are not going to be the winning days for me more than likely. And so I'm focusing a lot on the construction and trying to find ways where what's the path where I can leave 800 on the table. And it's not just a crazy thing to be doing, but it can work out optimally.
And for me, I'm trying to find lineups that have Paul George, Joel Embiid, Nick Batum, Reggie Jackson, and Marcus Morris, and hoping I can find something weird in those lineups.
Who's the chalk donkey now?
But that's what the sorting process is for me. Where right. I agree, that's a big part of it. But for me, I just sort out the ones that are going to be the highest owned, and I'm willing to take, past the top 150. I'm willing to take whatever comes up next. Today, actually, it was one way I deceived my process a little bit was I went to more Joel Embiid, as I mentioned, made sure to get half of my lineups to have him because that's just what I'm comfortable with on the slate. But I think there are some interesting ways to get there and some well-projected lineups that will not be anywhere near, like ones that are within the range, the 50-point range that Awesemo often talks about from the optimal lineup. There are a lot of ones out there that I think are going to be less owned. So there are ways to capture it, especially if we're willing to take on some risk. So that's it. Eric, what are the final plugs here? I'll be back tomorrow on the deeper dive. And I guess my mystery co-host who's been undecided all week will be Steve Buzzard, who's actually fantastic at Showdown Slates. If you're not familiar, I've been doing great office hour shows and all of that. So tune into the deeper dive tomorrow with me to check that out. And we'll have Live Before Lock as well. But get the people whatever plugs you want here, Eric, because you are a star as always.
Oh my God. Thank you. I'm a star. I'm a mother. You know the line. Everybody knows the line. Good old Boogie Nights. Go check it out if you haven't. But no, Steve Buzzard, I would never tune into a show with just you. So I guess I get Buzzard. So that sounds fantastic. But nothing to really plug. I will say I just swapped everything to Rendon to make that work for Donaldson. And of course, Rendon's not in the lineup either as we're leaving. So I'm having a lot of fun with baseball today. I'm going to get out of here. Best of luck to all of you. Hope you guys pulled out a couple of tidbits here or there. Spags keeps winning all the money, so I hope he does again tonight.
Yeah, follow at Eric Lindquist. I switched all my lineups to Chris Randone, so I don't know how that's going to go, but we'll find. Hopefully they're stock-based ones. I feel like he's making a kill in there. Follow at Eric Lindquist. Follow at Chris Spags. Follow at Awesemo_com. We appreciate all of you guys for being here, and as always, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button before you go, and stay tuned because the content goes on all weekend long, as you guys do as well. So we appreciate you all. Have a great night. Good luck.
Cut the feed quick, Jordan.